My own voice came through the ballroom speakers so clearly that for half a second, I thought I had said the words again. I hope this wedding falls apart. Every conversation died. Forks stopped against plates. Heads turned toward me from every table in the room. My younger sister, Amber, stood beside the sweetheart table in her white wedding gown, with a champagne glass in one hand and the smallest smile on her face. "See," she said into the microphone, "she's always been jealous." I didn't argue with her. I walked straight to the DJ booth, took the playback remote from his hand, and pointed at the timeline on his screen. "Now let me play the part she cut." The recording moved backward 27 seconds. Amber's glass slipped from her fingers, hit the carpet, and spilled champagne across the hem of her dress. Then she ran toward us. "Turn it off." Before I tell you what played next, I hope you're doing well wherever you're listening from, because this was the night I finally learned how dangerous a family story can become when only one person is allowed to tell it. Stay with me, because those 27 seconds led me back through 6 years of things I thought I understood. And if you enjoy stories about family secrets, consequences, and people finally being forced to face the truth, subscribe to the channel and stay with me until the end. 5 months later, I stood at the edge of my parents' backyard in Richmond and looked at 30 folding chairs arranged beneath 2 white canopy tents. More than half of them were empty. My mother had always treated the annual Dawson reunion like a small diplomatic summit. She made seating charts, even though nobody asked for them. She planned the menu weeks ahead. She knew who was speaking to whom, who had recently argued, who needed to be placed at opposite ends of a table, and who should be called 3 times the week before because they were bad at committing. That July afternoon, nobody asked her whether I was coming. Nobody asked what my father had said about anything. People had stopped using her as the switchboard for the family. At the time of Amber's wedding, I would not have believed that could happen. I thought my family had broken because I had left it. I know now that it had stayed together for years, only because nobody compared what they had been told. The wedding was in March, at a hotel in downtown Richmond, with a ballroom Amber had described to me 3 separate times as classic, not flashy. It was beautiful, but not ridiculous. Warm lighting, cream linens, white flowers, a band for the first half of the reception, and a DJ for the second. Amber had always been good at presentation. She worked in communications and events, and she understood how people moved through a room, where their eyes went, and how much a small detail could change the mood of an entire evening. I had learned a long time ago that the same skill worked outside a ballroom. I drove in from Charlottesville by myself. I had booked my own hotel room and kept my car keys in the small clutch I carried all evening. That probably sounds like an unnecessary detail, but it mattered to me. I had spent too many years letting other people decide when a family event was over, when a conversation was finished, or whether leaving would be called making a scene. I had no intention of being stranded in a room where I was expected to tolerate something for the sake of appearances. If the night went badly, I could leave. That was the promise I made myself before I stepped out of my car. I had almost declined the invitation. What changed my mind was my father. David Dawson had called me himself a few weeks earlier. Not Mom calling to tell me Dad wanted me there. Not Amber saying Dad would be hurt if I stayed away. Dad called my phone, and when I saw his name, I stared at it long enough that it nearly went to voicemail. We had spoken only a handful of times in almost 6 years, and none of those conversations had repaired anything. His voice had sounded older than I remembered. He told me Amber wanted me at the wedding, but then he paused and said, "I want you there too, Rachel. I'm asking for myself." I didn't interpret that as an apology. I didn't pretend 6 years had disappeared. But direct communication had become rare enough in my family that I decided to respect it when it happened. The first 20 minutes at the reception were almost normal. That should have made me relax. Instead, it made me more attentive. Amber hugged me where the photographer could see us and held on one beat longer than necessary. "I'm really glad you came," she said brightly. Maybe she meant it. Maybe part of her did. I had stopped pretending people could have only one motive at a time. My mother, Patricia, found me less than 5 minutes later, pressed both hands around mine, and said, "Tonight is about healing. I told her I was there to celebrate Amber's marriage. Mom smiled as though I had agreed with her. That was one of the habits I had grown wary of. Someone in my family would say something broad enough to mean anything. I would answer something different, and later the exchange would be remembered as agreement. For years, I had been told I was too literal about language. My job probably made that worse. I worked in records governance for a university system, which is much less exciting than people imagine when they hear the word records. Most days, it meant policies, retention schedules, source documents, version histories, and explaining why the copy someone saved 6 times was not necessarily the original. My mother used to joke that I treated family conversations like audit files. Maybe I did, but by then I had learned that context mattered most when someone insisted it didn't. I saw the first thing that bothered me during dinner. A printed program sat beneath the folded napkin at each place setting. I had looked at mine when I sat down, but I hadn't read every line. Between the first dance and the cake cutting was something called Sisters Through the Years. I read it twice. Amber and I had discussed a possible tribute 2 weeks earlier during a video call, but I had refused to participate after I realized what she wanted. She had described it as a few funny childhood stories and maybe some photographs. By the end of the call, it had turned into something else. We had argued. I had assumed the tribute had been dropped. I looked toward Amber's table. She caught me staring at the program and lifted her eyebrows as if asking whether something was wrong. I held up the paper slightly. She gave me a tiny shrug. I remembered something she had said earlier that week when we exchanged a few messages about the wedding schedule. If anything gets played, she had written, at least it'll be the actual recording, not somebody's version of it. At the time, I thought she was taking a cheap shot at me because she knew how much I hated being paraphrased. Sitting in that ballroom, with Sisters Through the Years printed in black letters beneath my thumb, the sentence felt different. I leaned toward Aunt Claire, my father's older sister, who was sitting 2 seats away. Did Amber tell you what this sisters thing is? Claire shook her head. I assumed you knew. I didn't. She gave me a look that lasted only a second, but I knew that look. It was the family version of, please don't start anything. I didn't start anything. I ate my dinner. That distinction became important later. The speeches began after the plates were cleared. Evan's best man was funny without humiliating him, which I appreciated more than I expected. Amber's college roommate cried during her toast. Dad spoke for less than 3 minutes and somehow managed to make Amber laugh without making himself the center of the room. Mom followed him and talked about family, tradition, and how every difficult season eventually teaches people what really matters. Once, she looked directly at me when she said it. I kept my face neutral. Then Amber stood. She thanked everyone for coming. She thanked our parents. She thanked Evan for loving every complicated part of her. People laughed softly at that. Then she said she had one more thing she wanted to share. For anyone who grew up with siblings, she said, you know they remember you at your best and your worst. A few people laughed again. My stomach tightened. Amber looked toward me. And sometimes, she continued, they're honest in ways nobody else would dare to be. The large screen behind the bandstand lit up with a childhood picture of the 2 of us at a county fair. I was maybe 13. Amber was a toddler on my shoulders, both of us squinting into the sun. Another photo appeared, then another. For perhaps 30 seconds, I wondered whether I had been too suspicious. Then the photograph stopped. The screen went dark. My voice filled the ballroom. I hope this wedding falls apart. Nothing in my body moved at first. The sound was familiar enough to recognize and unfamiliar enough to feel stolen. I knew I had said it. What I didn't immediately know was when. The room became so quiet that I could hear someone set down a water glass 3 tables away. Amber turned slowly toward the guests. She did not look shocked. That was the detail that settled me faster than anything else could have. She smiled. See, she said. She's always been jealous. A few guests glanced down. Others stared openly at me. Someone near the back whispered something I couldn't hear. My mother covered her mouth with her fingers, a perfectly calibrated expression of wounded disappointment. I felt heat spread up the back of my neck. My heartbeat landed hard beneath my ribs. For one dangerous second, I wanted to stand there and explain everything at once. 6 years, every conversation, every time somebody had told me what someone else supposedly thought of me, every family event I had skipped because I had been told my presence would make things uncomfortable. Then I looked at Amber. She was watching the room, not me. That was when the humiliation stopped feeling accidental. I stood. "Rachel," Mom said quietly. I didn't answer her. I walked toward the DJ booth. The DJ looked at me approaching and immediately lifted both hands away from his equipment. He was probably in his 20s and had the expression of a man who had been hired to play music and had suddenly found himself operating evidence in a family trial. "Can you show me the file?" I asked. Amber's voice came from behind me. "Rachel, don't." I looked at the screen beside the DJ. The audio file was still loaded. A timeline stretched across the display, and the playhead sat near the end of a short segment. "Was that the whole file?" I asked him. He hesitated. That hesitation told me more than an answer. "I was given a cue point," he said carefully. "What cue point?" Amber was moving toward us now. "Don't do this at my wedding." I turned toward her. "You just played my voice to the entire room." "You said it." "I know I said it." That seemed to surprise her. I looked back at the DJ. "How much comes before the cue?" He checked the display. "About 27 seconds. Amber stopped walking. There are moments when the body tells the truth faster than the mouth can invent one. Her shoulders lifted. Her eyes went to the control screen, then to the DJ, then to me. I held out my hand for the small playback remote he had been using. He gave it to me, although the actual timeline controls remained on his console. "Back it up," I said. "Rachel," Mom snapped. I ignored her. Amber stepped closer. "This is ridiculous. You're trying to ruin my reception because you don't like what you said." I looked at her. "Then the 27 seconds won't matter." She didn't answer. I turned to the DJ again. "Now, let me play the part she cut." He dragged the timeline backward. 27 seconds. The sound returned. Amber's voice came first. "Mom said not to argue with you. Just let you talk until you give us one sentence we can use." Same as last time. Every muscle in my back went rigid. Then my own recorded voice answered. "What do you mean, last time?" "Forget it." "No. What do you mean?" Amber sighed on the recording. "Rachel, you always do this. You take everything apart until nobody can have a normal conversation with you. Was Dad the last time?" There was a pause. I had forgotten that question. Standing in the ballroom, I felt as if the floor shifted half an inch beneath my shoes. On the recording, Amber said, "Just say what you came here to say. You're the one who called me." "Fine. Then say it. You think I'm terrible. You think Mom favors me. You think this wedding is fake. Whatever it is, just say it." My recorded voice came back, angry now, but controlled. "If this wedding is another stage where you and Mom get to turn me into the villain, then I hope this wedding falls apart." The clip stopped. Amber's champagne glass hit the carpet. She ran toward the booth. "Turn it off." Nobody needed to. It was already over. What followed was not the satisfying movie moment people imagine when they hear a story like this. The room did not rise as one and applaud me. Nobody pointed at Amber and declared me innocent. Real families are messier than that. Some guests looked furious with her. Some looked embarrassed for everyone. A woman from Evan's side whispered that none of this should have been played at a wedding in the first place, which was true. One of Amber's friends started crying. Mom walked toward me with her jaw locked so tightly I could see the muscle move. "You came here looking for a fight," she said. "No," I replied. "I came because Dad asked me. This is your sister's wedding." I noticed. Then stop. I looked past her at Amber. Her face had gone pale beneath her makeup. Evan stood several feet away from her, saying nothing. He looked less angry than confused, which I understood. He had just learned that the family history he thought he knew had footnotes nobody had shown him. I handed the remote back to the DJ. Then I asked Amber the only question that mattered. "What was last time?" She opened her mouth. Nothing came out. Her eyes moved past me. Straight to Mom. It lasted less than a second, but I saw it. Mom saw me see it. That was enough. I didn't interrogate them in front of the ballroom. I didn't demand another microphone. I didn't call the guests to attention and explain 6 years of family history to people who had come for cake and dancing. I picked up my clutch, told Aunt Claire goodnight, and walked out under my own power. Mom followed me into the hallway. "If you leave now," she said, "everyone will think you did exactly what Amber said you would do." I stopped beside the elevator. For years, sentences like that had worked on me. Not because I was weak, but because I hated leaving a false version of myself behind in a room. I always wanted to correct the record. Clarify, explain, make sure nobody mistook silence for guilt. That night, I realized something. If I stayed, Mom would control what staying meant too. I pressed the elevator button. "They can think whatever they want tonight." Her face hardened. "You really don't care what this does to the family." I looked at her. "I care enough not to have this conversation through an audience." The elevator opened and I stepped inside. My hands started shaking only after the doors closed. Back in my hotel room, I took off my shoes, set my clutch on the desk, and opened my laptop. I wasn't looking for revenge. I wasn't even sure what I was looking for. I wanted to know what Amber meant when she said "same as last time," and why my father's name had come out of my mouth before I had time to think. 6 years earlier, there had been another argument, another recording, another sentence everyone in my family seemed to remember differently than I did. I logged into my personal archive and searched the year. The file appeared almost immediately. Summer, 2020. I stared at the file name. Then one word came back to me with uncomfortable clarity. Pathetic. I clicked the file. The file opened with the frozen image of Amber's face from 6 years earlier. She was 22 then, sitting on the edge of our parents' kitchen island with her phone propped against a ceramic fruit bowl, one knee pulled up beneath an oversized college sweatshirt. I remembered the call, but not because I had spent years replaying it. I remembered it because Amber had emailed me the recording afterward with a message that had annoyed me enough to make me save it. "Here's the whole thing so you can't say I misquoted you later." At the time, I had thought she was being sarcastic. I worked with records all day, and my habit was simple. If someone sent me a source file involved in a disagreement, I kept the source. I had downloaded it to my personal archive, named the folder by year and family event, and then left it untouched for 6 years. Sitting in that hotel room after Amber's wedding, barefoot on the carpet with the ballroom noise still echoing in my head, I finally understood why that boring habit mattered. I dragged the playback bar until I reached the argument I remembered. The sound quality was ordinary. Our mother moved around somewhere off camera. A cabinet opened. Amber complained that I was always criticizing the way Mom protected her. I told Amber that being protected from consequences was not the same thing as being loved. She laughed and said, "I was jealous because Dad had stopped treating me like the only competent person in the family." That part still irritated me, but irritation was not what I was looking for. I kept listening until my own voice became sharper. Then I heard the sentence that had lived in my memory as something ugly, but not unforgivable. "It's pathetic that Mom makes Dad beg Amber to apologize when Amber is the one who hurt someone." I paused the recording. I backed it up. I listened again. The sentence did not change. For almost 6 years, I had known that my father believed I had called him pathetic. I knew because that was what he had confronted me about the last time we had spoken properly in 2020. At the time, I assumed he had heard part of the argument secondhand and misunderstood me. Then Mom told me he had heard a recording. That had changed the equation. If Dad had heard my own voice and still believed I'd insulted him, I had eventually concluded there was nothing I could say that would matter. What I had never done was ask which recording he had heard. That bothered me now, but I refused to rewrite my past into something simpler just because I knew more in the present. I had been angry. Dad had been angry. Mom had been between us, translating everything. I had tried to go around her twice. Both times, Dad himself had closed the door. Those decisions were real, even if the information behind them was false. I did not call him at 2 in the morning. That would have been dramatic, and drama was exactly what Amber and Mom had spent years accusing me of creating. Instead, I saved a second copy of the original file, wrote down the date and the exact sentence, closed the laptop, and tried to sleep. I managed perhaps 3 hours. When I woke, my phone had a message from Dad sent a little after 7. "Can we talk tomorrow?" It was strange reading those 4 words after the wedding. Dad had called me directly to invite me months earlier, but that conversation had been about attendance, not about us. We had both handled it carefully, as if we were negotiating temporary access across a border. This was different. He had heard the 27 seconds. He had seen Amber look at Mom. He had heard me ask what last time meant. I typed 3 responses and deleted all of them. The first was angry. The second was too forgiving. The third sounded like something I would send to a colleague. I finally wrote, "Yes. Before we talk, I need something from you. Do you still have the recording you heard in 2020? Dad did not answer immediately. I checked out of the hotel, carried my bag to my car, and stopped for coffee before getting on the road toward Charlottesville. His response arrived while I was sitting in the parking lot. "I think so. It was emailed to me. I'll look." I stared at the screen longer than necessary. He had not asked why I wanted it. Maybe after the wedding, he already knew. The drive home gave me too much time to think. I remembered the first direct conversation Dad and I had after the original conflict. It had happened near the end of 2020. Mom had already told me he was furious and that I should stay away from the house until he calmed down. I had waited several days because I was angry too, then called him myself. Dad answered on the 4th ring. His voice was controlled in the way it always became when he was trying not to raise it. I told him Mom said he did not want me there and asked whether that was actually what he wanted. He said yes. I asked him if he had heard the full conversation. He said he had heard enough. Then he told me, "I don't want you coming to the house right now. Give me some space until you're ready to take responsibility for what you said." I had pushed once more. "Dad, I'm asking you directly. Is that your decision, or is Mom telling you what she thinks is best?" "It's my decision." There had been no ambiguity in that answer. That was why I left it alone for several months. Not because Mom told me to disappear. Because my father did. Early the next year, after the anger had cooled enough that I no longer rehearsed arguments in the shower, I sent him an email. I told him I was still willing to talk about what happened, but only if we spoke directly and without Mom carrying messages between us. I said if he wanted the full context of what I had said, I would give it to him. His reply came the following day. "I'm not ready for that conversation. Please respect the distance I asked for." I had read it twice, closed my laptop, and made a decision I was still willing to defend. I was not going to spend my 30s knocking on a door someone had told me twice to stop knocking on. My flaw was not that I lacked pride. I had too much of it. Once someone made it clear they had chosen a version of me that required no input from me, I stopped auditioning for a better role. It protected me. It also made me predictable. I could see that now, though I still did not know who had been relying on that predictability or for how long. Dad sent the file shortly after noon. I was already home by then, my overnight bag still sitting unopened near the bedroom door. His email had been forwarded from an older personal account, and the attachment had a generic file name that told me nothing. I downloaded it without opening the forwarded message first. Then I put Dad's file beside Amber's original from 2020. I did not need special software. I did not need to recover deleted metadata or perform some kind of digital forensics. I pressed play. Dad's version started in the middle of my sentence. My voice said, "It's pathetic that Mom makes Dad." Then there was a tiny jump, when Amber is the one who hurt someone. The missing words were not long. They were enough. I played the original again. "It's pathetic that Mom makes Dad beg Amber to apologize when Amber is the one who hurt someone." Then Dad's version. "It's pathetic that Mom makes Dad when Amber is the one who hurt someone." The edit was clumsy once I knew what I was hearing. 6 years earlier, if Dad had been angry before pressing play and someone had already told him I had insulted him, I understood how his brain could have supplied the rest. That did not absolve him. It explained the path. I finally opened the old forwarded email. The sender on the original message was my mother. For several seconds, I did nothing. I had expected Amber. That was the truth. Amber had recorded the call. Amber had sent me the full export. Amber had spent our entire adult lives telling me I overanalyzed everything she said. She was the obvious source. Seeing Patricia Dawson's name above the attachment changed the weight of the room around me. I called Dad. He answered immediately. Did you get it? Yes. A pause followed. I could hear the low hum of something in the background, probably the television. Dad had retired from civil engineering a couple of years earlier, and he had become one of those people who kept financial news playing at a volume low enough that nobody was really watching it. The familiar sound made the conversation feel more ordinary than it was. Dad, who sent you that file? Another pause. Longer. Your mother. Did Amber send it to her first? I don't know. Did Mom tell you she had edited it? She didn't say she edited anything. I closed my eyes. That wasn't my question. Dad exhaled. Rachel, I don't remember every detail from 6 years ago. Then remember the part you do know. He was silent. I looked at the 2 audio files on my screen. The version I have starts before that sentence. The version you were sent starts in the middle of it. Maybe she trimmed the call because it was long. I almost laughed, but there was nothing funny in me. She trimmed out the words that explained who I was criticizing. I'm not defending it. You just gave me an innocent explanation for it. I'm trying to understand what happened. So am I. That stopped him. Dad was not a stupid man. He had spent most of his career dealing with designs where one wrong assumption could affect everything built on top of it. I think that was why silence settled between us after that. Once I stripped away the emotion, the structure was simple. He had received a shortened recording from Mom. The shortening changed the apparent meaning. He had acted on that meaning. I had then acted on his response. Finally, he said, I heard what Amber played last night. I know. The part before it. I know. Your mother said Amber went too far. That sentence caught my attention. When did Mom tell you that? This morning. What did she say Amber was supposed to do? Dad hesitated. She said the tribute was Amber's idea, and she didn't know exactly what was going to be played. I looked at the wall across from my desk. But Amber said on the recording, Mom said not to argue with you. Let you talk until you give us one sentence we can use. I heard it. Then one of those statements is not true. Rachel. No, don't do that. Do what? Say my name like I'm making the conversation harder by noticing the contradiction. He became quiet again. I lowered my voice because I did not want the conversation to become one more example someone could reduce to. Rachel got angry. I'm not asking you to choose me over Mom. I'm asking you to answer things directly. If you want to know what I said, ask me. If I want to know what you said, I'll ask you. No more Mom said you meant this. No more Amber told me Dad thinks that. I'm done communicating through people. That sounds reasonable. It should have sounded reasonable 6 years ago. I know. I did not let that 2-word admission turn into forgiveness. It was too small for that, and we both knew it. Instead, I asked him the question that had been sitting beneath everything since the wedding. When Mom sent you that recording, did you ever think it didn't sound like me? His answer took long enough that I knew it mattered. Yes. I leaned back in my chair. He continued before I could speak. I thought the wording was strange, but I was angry, and your mother said you had been saying things like that for months. She said you were frustrated with me because I kept helping Amber. And you believed her. I believed the recording. You believed the way it was presented to you. That too. It was not enough, but it was the first time Dad had separated those things. I had spent years assuming he had heard the truth and rejected me anyway. Now I knew he had heard a version. What I did not yet know was whether Mom had created that version deliberately, whether Amber had helped her, or whether the wedding had simply repeated a pattern nobody bothered to name. Dad cleared his throat. Your mother is going to be upset if you start calling everyone and asking about old arguments. I'm not starting a campaign. That's not what I said. It's what you're worried about. I'm worried about this getting bigger than it already is. I looked at the screen again. 6 years of distance sat between two files that differed by a handful of words. Dad, it is already bigger. We just didn't know what it was. What are you going to do? I'm going to find out whether this happened once. He sounded tired when he replied. And if it didn't? Then I'll decide what to do with facts instead of family summaries. I ended the call without shouting, which probably frustrated some imaginary version of me my relatives had carried around for years. I spent the next hour doing nothing more dramatic than making lunch and unpacking my bag. I needed the ordinary actions. They kept me from convincing myself I had to solve 6 years before dinner. That was another thing I had learned with age. Urgency and importance were not the same thing. Amber and Mom had always been good at creating urgency. Answer now. Apologize now. Don't make this awkward. Come to dinner because everyone is waiting. If I wanted something different, I had to refuse their pace as well as their version of events. My phone buzzed while I was putting clothes into the washing machine. It was Aunt Claire. I expected a message about the wedding. Maybe an apology for the look she had given me when I asked about Amber's tribute. Instead, she wrote, I need to ask you something directly because I'm starting to think I should have done that years ago. I sat on the edge of the bed before opening the rest. Her second message arrived almost immediately. Did you really ask us not to contact you all those years ago? I read Aunt Claire's question 3 times before I answered it. No. I never asked anyone to stop contacting me. The typing indicator appeared almost immediately, disappeared, then returned. A minute later, she sent me a screenshot from an old text conversation with my mother. The date was from early 2021, not long after Dad had rejected my second attempt to talk directly. Mom had written, Rachel wants no contact for now. Please respect her wishes. She needs space from the family. Claire had answered that she understood and hoped I was okay. Mom had responded with a heart and told her she would let everyone know when I was ready. I sat at my desk staring at those words, feeling something colder than anger work its way through me. I had asked Dad for a direct conversation. I had asked him not to communicate through Mom. When he refused, I stopped chasing him. I had never told my aunts, cousins, or anyone else that I wanted them gone. I called Claire instead of continuing by text. She answered with, Rachel, I'm sorry. Before I had even said hello, I told her not to apologize yet because I needed to understand what she remembered. She said Mom had told several relatives that I wanted a clean break after the argument with Dad. Claire had considered calling me anyway, but Patricia had framed it as respecting a boundary. That mattered to me because boundaries were something my family knew I took seriously. If I asked for space, Claire would have given it. Mom had taken one of my actual values and used it to make the lie believable. Did Dad know she was telling people this? I asked. Claire said she didn't know. She had never asked him because she assumed Mom was speaking for both of them. That sentence stayed with me after we hung up. She assumed Mom was speaking for both of them. We had all done that. To understand how ordinary that assumption had once seemed, I had to go back to the summer of 2020, when I was 33 and Amber was 22. Dad and I had always been more alike in temperament. David liked things stated clearly. He had spent his career as a civil engineer, and he approached problems as though there had to be a load-bearing answer beneath all the emotion. When I was younger, that made him easier for me to talk to than Mom. If my car made a strange noise, Dad wanted to know when it started and under what conditions. If I was considering changing jobs, he wanted salary, commute, benefits, and whether I actually liked the work. Mom wanted to know how everybody involved felt about my decision. Neither approach was inherently wrong, but as I grew older, I trusted conversations with Dad because I generally left them knowing what he meant. Amber had a different relationship with both of them. She was 11 years younger than I was, which meant we had not grown up as equal rivals fighting over the bathroom mirror. By the time she entered middle school, I was already away at college. For much of her childhood, I was closer to a visiting young aunt than a traditional sister. I bought her ridiculous birthday presents, took her for ice cream when I came home, and let her complain about Mom because I could always leave again on Sunday night. The serious conflict began when she became an adult, and the consequences of being the youngest stopped being cute. Amber had learned early that if an argument lasted long enough, Mom would eventually step in and translate everybody into softer versions of themselves. Mom did it so naturally that none of us called it manipulation then. If Dad told Amber, "You committed to this, so you need to fix it," Mom would later say, "Your father is only worried because he loves you." If Amber told Dad, "You always assume Rachel is right," Mom would tell him, "She just feels like she can never measure up." If I said Amber needed to apologize without adding excuses, Mom would call me later and say, "She knows she was wrong. She just can't handle being attacked." The word attacked did a lot of work in our family. It could mean shouting. It could also mean asking Amber the same question twice when she had not answered it. The argument that changed everything began with something small enough that nobody would have remembered it 6 years later if Mom had not turned it into a dividing line. Patricia had an important specialist follow-up that summer after a minor heart procedure earlier in the year. She was doing well, but Dad wanted someone to drive her because the appointment was across town and he had a work commitment he could not easily move. Amber volunteered. Nobody forced her. She said she would pick Mom up, wait during the appointment, and bring her home. The morning of the appointment, Amber texted that she could not do it. A friend had changed plans for a small birthday gathering, and Amber had decided she needed to leave earlier than expected. Dad ended up canceling his work meeting and taking Mom himself. It was inconvenient, not catastrophic. Mom was not stranded on a curb. Nobody died. If Amber had simply apologized and admitted she had made a selfish choice, I doubt I would remember any of it. Instead, when Dad confronted her that evening, she said the appointment had not been an emergency. Dad could move his meeting more easily than she could change her friend's plans. And everyone was treating her like she had abandoned Mom in an ambulance. Dad told her that was not the point. She had committed to something and backed out because something more fun came along. Amber started crying. Mom immediately told Dad to lower his voice, though he had not raised it. 10 minutes later, Dad was the one standing outside Amber's bedroom door, saying he did not want her to think he believed she was a bad daughter. Amber accepted that reassurance without ever giving the apology he had originally asked for. I was there because I had stopped by after work with groceries. I watched the entire thing happen from the kitchen, and something about the routine of it irritated me more than the actual missed appointment. Dad was frustrated. Amber was crying. Mom was smoothing the edges until the only person expected to change his behavior was Dad. I said, "Why are you apologizing to her?" Mom turned toward me immediately. "Rachel, please. I'm asking Dad." Amber opened her bedroom door. "Because he yelled at me." "He didn't yell. You weren't in the room the whole time. I was standing 15 feet away." Mom told me Amber already felt terrible. I asked Amber what she felt terrible about. She told me I was being cruel. Dad rubbed his forehead and told everyone to stop. That should have been the end of it. I could have picked up my grocery bag and gone home. Instead, I was 33, irritated, and tired of watching the same pattern repeat. One of my flaws has always been that once I believe a problem is structural, I have trouble pretending the individual incident does not matter. I told Mom, "You keep doing this." Amber screws up. Dad tries to hold her accountable. Amber gets upset. And somehow, Dad ends up apologizing for making her upset. Amber said, "You love when Dad chooses you over me." That landed harder than it should have because there was enough truth underneath it to hurt. Dad and I were closer in some ways. I knew Amber had noticed. Instead of admitting that, I became defensive. "This isn't about Dad choosing me. It's always about that with you." Mom told us both to stop. Amber did not. She said I liked being the competent daughter and could not stand that she did not need my approval. I told her she was confusing not needing my approval with never accepting responsibility. She called me condescending. I told her she was spoiled. None of those were my finest sentences. 2 days later, Amber asked for a video call because, according to her, she wanted to clear the air without everyone rewriting what happened. She told me at the beginning that she was recording it. I remember laughing and saying, "Good, send me the whole thing when we're done." At the time, I thought having a recording would force us to stay honest. I did not yet understand that a source could be completely truthful, while the person presenting it could still decide which truth anyone was allowed to hear. Amber was at our parents' house during the call. Mom moved in and out of the kitchen behind her. I was at my apartment in Charlottesville, still annoyed but calmer than I had been 2 nights earlier. For the first several minutes, we actually discussed the missed appointment. I told Amber I did not think she was evil for changing plans. I thought she had handled the consequences badly. Amber said Dad treated her like a child. I said refusing adult responsibility was a good way to make people treat you like one. That was sharp. I knew it then. The conversation shifted when Amber accused me of enjoying Dad's disappointment in her. I told her I did not enjoy watching anyone in our family lose. I was tired of watching Mom erase consequences whenever Amber became emotional. Mom heard that from somewhere off camera and stepped closer. I don't erase consequences, she said. You make Dad apologize every time Amber is upset with the consequence. I help your father understand that not everyone responds the way you do. Amber smiled without humor. There, that's exactly what I mean. You think Dad has to be protected from us because only you understand him. I didn't say that. You don't have to. I remember staring at her little image on my screen and realizing we were no longer talking about Mom's appointment. We were talking about our positions in the family. Amber believed I had been given authority she wanted. I believed she had been given protection I had never been offered. Both things could have been partly true. Then Dad came through the back door. I heard his keys before I saw him. Amber looked over her shoulder. Mom told him we were trying to work things out. Dad said he did not want another fight and started toward the hallway. Amber called after him. Rachel thinks you shouldn't have apologized to me. He stopped. I said, That isn't exactly what I said. Amber replied, You said Mom makes him apologize. Dad turned toward the screen. That was when I said the sentence. It's pathetic that Mom makes Dad beg Amber to apologize when Amber is the one who hurt someone. Even hearing it now, I know it was unnecessarily harsh. I could have said unhealthy. I could have said unfair. I chose pathetic because I was angry and wanted the word to land. But the subject of that sentence was never my father. The thing I called pathetic was the pattern. Dad heard the full sentence in real time. But he was moving through the room and only caught part of the argument. He asked what I had just said. Amber answered before I could. She said it's pathetic that you make me apologize. No, I said. That is literally the opposite of what I said. Mom stepped in. Everybody is upset. This isn't productive. I wanted to keep going. Dad did not. He told Amber to end the call before we all said something worse. She did. A few hours later, Amber emailed me the full recording. Her message said, Here's the whole thing so you can't say I misquoted you later. I downloaded it because that was what I did with source material. Then I wrote back that I was done arguing for the night. I did not send the recording to Dad because, at that point, I still assumed he had heard enough of the live conversation to know what I meant or would ask me if he did not. That assumption cost us more than I knew. Over the next few days, Mom called several times. She told me Dad was deeply hurt by what I had said. I corrected her. She told me correction was not the same as accountability. I said I would talk to Dad myself. She told me not to because he needed time. Eventually, I called anyway. That was the conversation I had already remembered in my hotel room after the wedding. Dad told me he had heard enough. He told me not to come to the house and said it was his decision. Months later, when I emailed one final time offering to talk directly and provide the full context, he told me he was not ready and asked me to respect the distance. That was where my responsibility began. I stopped. I did not spend the next 6 years crying over family photographs. My life kept moving because I made it move. I took on a larger role at work. I built friendships with people who did not require an interpreter to explain my tone. I traveled when I could. I learned that Sunday dinner could be peaceful when nobody spent dessert reconstructing what somebody absent had supposedly said. There were moments when I missed Dad so badly I would reach for my phone before remembering that I had already knocked twice. But I did not confuse missing someone with an obligation to keep begging them to choose me. What I did not understand was how the rest of the family was interpreting my silence. By Father's Day of 2022, Dad and I had barely spoken for more than a year. A few days before the family cookout, Mom called and said, "Your father wants something easy this year. Just people who are comfortable with each other." I knew what she meant. I told her I understood and did not go. Claire later told me she had been informed that I had declined because I wasn't ready to be around everyone. Nobody called because they thought calling would pressure me. In 2023, my parents had an anniversary dinner. Mom told me, "It may be easier if you don't come. David doesn't want the night turning into a conversation about the past." I said, "Fine." To Aunt Claire, Mom apparently said I did not want to see anyone yet. Once again, I looked like the person choosing distance. In 2024, Dad had a health scare that turned out to be minor. By then, direct contact between us had withered into occasional birthday messages and short holiday texts. I asked Mom how he was doing because she had been the one to tell me about it. She said he needed rest and did not want calls. I believed her because by that point, the pattern matched what Dad himself had told me years before. That was what made the system effective. Patricia did not have to invent an entirely new reality every time. She only had to place each new message on top of an old wound that was already real. Sitting at my desk in 2026 with Claire's screenshot open, I finally saw how my own pride had helped preserve it. After Dad rejected me twice, I had decided never again to ask relatives whether I was welcome somewhere. If Mom said an invitation was not meant for me, I stayed home. If nobody called, I did not chase them. I had believed I was refusing humiliation. In some cases, I probably was. But that choice also meant nobody ever had to reconcile what Mom told me with what she told them. Claire was still on the phone when I asked, "Who else did Mom tell I wanted no contact?" "I know she told your cousin Lauren something similar," she said. "Maybe your uncle too. I don't want to speak for anybody." That answer almost made me smile despite everything. Good. Good? You just said you don't want to speak for them. Claire went quiet, then gave a small, sad laugh. I guess I'm learning. Sue and I did not ask Claire to call the family and announce that Patricia had lied. I did not post the screenshot anywhere. I did not even call Mom. I opened a blank document and wrote down 3 names of people whose relationships with me had changed after 2020. Claire had already answered for herself. The other 3 would answer for themselves too. The first person I contacted was my cousin Lauren. We had been close enough in our 20s that she had once called me from an airport bathroom because she was considering leaving a terrible boyfriend before a vacation and wanted somebody to tell her she was not crazy. After my fallout with Dad, our messages became shorter, then stopped. I had assumed she had chosen the family version of events. Maybe she had. I no longer wanted assumptions doing the work. I wrote, "I'm trying to clear up something old. I'm not asking you to take sides. Did you stop contacting me because I asked you to?" Lauren called instead of texting. Her first words were, "What do you mean?" "I mean exactly that." "Were you told I wanted no contact?" There was a long silence. "Your mom said you were cutting everybody off." "I wasn't. She said you didn't want people reaching out because you were done with the family drama." "I never said that to her." Lauren sounded genuinely confused. "Rachel, I sent you a Christmas card the first year. You never responded." "I never got one. That's not why I stopped calling." "Why did you?" "Because your mom told me you were angry that people kept trying to pull you back in." I closed my eyes. Lauren kept going, slower now. "I thought I was respecting what you wanted. You were respecting what she told you I wanted." Another silence. Then she said something that made the entire 6-year story shift again. "I thought you hated all of us, Rachel. Your mother said you didn't even want your dad calling you." Lauren's last sentence stayed between us for several seconds. "Your mother said you didn't even want your dad calling you." I looked down at Claire's screenshot again, then at the 2 versions of the old recordings still open on my laptop. The temptation was immediate. I wanted to call every relative whose number I still had and ask what Patricia Dawson had told them about me. I wanted to create one enormous group thread, attach the full recording, attach Dad's edited copy, attach Claire's screenshot, and tell everyone to compare notes. It would have felt efficient. It also would have made Amber's accusation that I was building a campaign look almost true. So I didn't do it. I opened a document for myself and created a simple timeline with dates, events, and sources. Then I made myself a rule. I would contact only people connected to an incident that directly involved me, and I would ask only 2 questions. What were you told, and who told you? I would not tell them what answer I wanted. I would not ask them whether they believed Mom was manipulating everyone. I would not replace my mother as the new person explaining the family to itself. Lauren was quiet on the phone when I told her I had never asked Dad not to call me. But you did disappear, she said finally. The words were blunt enough that I respected them. You stopped answering people. You stopped coming to things. Maybe your mom lied about why, but you made it pretty easy for everyone to believe her. That hit the exact place in me I had been trying not to defend. You're right about part of that, I said. Dad told me directly he wanted space. Months later, I offered one more time to talk without Mom in the middle, and he told me he still wasn't ready. After that, I stopped trying. For almost 6 years. Yes. Lauren exhaled. Rachel, that's a long time to let pride make decisions. It was pride, I said, and self-respect. Sometimes they look exactly the same from the inside. She didn't argue with that. I told her I could own the fact that I stopped reaching out. I could own every invitation I genuinely declined, every message I left unanswered, and every angry thing I had actually said. What I would not own was telling relatives not to contact me when I had never said it, refusing invitations I had never received, or asking Dad not to call when the opposite was true. Lauren softened after that, but she did not suddenly become my defender. She told me she needed time to think about how much of the last several years she had interpreted through Mom's explanations. That was the first thing I learned once people started comparing notes. Truth did not produce instant loyalty. Sometimes it produced embarrassment. Sometimes defensiveness. Sometimes the person hearing it realized they had participated in something ugly without meaning to, and their first instinct was to explain themselves instead of apologize. Claire handled it differently. She asked me to send her the full recording from the wedding call, and the screenshot Dad had forwarded, showing Mom had been the one to send him the old excerpt. I hesitated before sending anything because I did not want the files circulating through the entire family. Claire understood. She promised she would not forward them and said she only wanted to hear the source herself. An hour later, she called back. I'm ashamed, she said. Don't make this about being ashamed. How am I supposed to feel? I don't know. But I'm not calling people for apologies. Claire went silent. I continued. I need facts, that's all. She told me what she remembered from early 2021. Patricia had called her after Dad and I stopped speaking and said I was cutting myself off because I felt judged by the family. Mom had specifically asked Claire not to push me because I needed to feel in control of the separation. The wording sounded so much like something I might have said in a therapy session that it made my skin crawl. Mom had not just invented a boundary. She had described it using language she knew I valued. Did she ever tell you Dad was trying to contact me? I asked. No. Did Dad ever tell you that himself? No. Did you ever ask him? Claire hesitated. No. There it was again. One person speaking for another, and everyone accepting it because Patricia had always been the person who coordinated things. Birthdays, holiday dinners, medical updates, who needed a ride, who was upset with whom. She had made herself useful enough that questioning the information she carried felt almost rude. I thanked Claire and ended the call before we could drift into analyzing Mom's personality. I was not ready for that. I was still trying to establish what had happened, not why. The next contradiction came from my Uncle Mark, Mom's younger brother. We had never been particularly close, but he had been at my parents' anniversary dinner 3 years earlier. I remembered that dinner because Mom had called me about it 2 weeks before the date. Her tone had been careful and sympathetic. Your father wants to keep it immediate family, she had told me. He doesn't want the evening becoming about unresolved things. I had asked, "Did Dad say he doesn't want me there?" Mom paused before answering. "He said he wants a peaceful night." That was not technically the same sentence, and even then I had noticed the difference. I had been tired enough of interpreting invitations by that point that I did not challenge it. I told her I understood and made other plans. When I called Mark, I did not tell him any of that. "I'm trying to clear up something about Mom and Dad's anniversary dinner a few years ago," I said. "What were you told about why I wasn't there?" Mark sounded uncomfortable immediately. "Rachel, I don't want to get involved in whatever's happening after the wedding. I'm not asking you to get involved. I'm asking what you were told." He sighed. "Your mom said you declined." "Those exact words?" "She said she invited you and you said you weren't ready to be around the family." I felt my fingers tighten around the phone. "Do you still have anything from that dinner?" "Like what?" "Texts? A group thread? An invitation?" "I might." I waited while he searched. I could hear the faint tapping of his phone and a television somewhere behind him. After a minute, he said, "Yeah, there's a thread." He sent me 2 screenshots. The first was a family group conversation about the dinner. Mom had written, "Rachel won't be joining us. She says she isn't ready, and I think we should respect that." Claire had responded with a sad face. Mark had asked whether he should leave my name off the card they were all signing. Mom said yes because she did not want to make me uncomfortable. The second screenshot was from the morning after the dinner. Mom had written, "It was a beautiful night. I just wish all my girls had wanted to be here." I read that sentence 4 times. It was not a legal confession. It was not dramatic proof of some criminal conspiracy. It was worse in a quieter way. Mom had told me Dad preferred I stay away, then told everyone else I had chosen not to come. She had created the distance and then mourned it publicly. I pulled up my own old messages from the same week. I still had the text I sent her after the phone call. "I understand Dad wants it immediate family. Tell him happy anniversary for me." Mom had answered, "I will. Maybe next year things will be different." I placed the screenshots side by side. Neither account required special interpretation. They could not both be true. I did not send them to every relative. I sent them to Dad. Before attaching them, I wrote, "This concerns you directly, so I think you should see both sides. Mom told me you wanted the anniversary dinner limited to immediate family because you didn't want unresolved issues there. She told everyone else that I had declined because I wasn't ready. Which version did you believe at the time?" Dad called 20 minutes later. "I never told her not to invite you," he said. I leaned back in my chair and looked out the window. It had started raining over Charlottesville, a thin gray sheet against the glass. "Did you know she had told me that?" "No." "Did you ask why I wasn't there?" "I asked your mother whether you were coming. She said you had declined, and that was enough." His silence answered before he did. "At the time, yes." I let a few seconds pass because I wanted him to hear the shape of that answer without me filling the space. Then he said, "Maybe she thought she was protecting me." I almost closed my eyes. Instead, I asked, "Protecting you from what?" "Another argument. With your own daughter?" "Rachel, things were tense. Things were non-existent. We weren't even talking. That was part of the problem." "No, Dad. That was the result of the problem." He exhaled sharply. "I'm not trying to excuse everything your mother did. You keep doing it anyway. That's not fair. It's exactly what you did with the recording. Maybe she trimmed it because the call was long. Maybe she told relatives I wanted no contact because she was respecting my space. Maybe she told me you didn't want me at your anniversary because she was protecting you. Every time I show you 2 things that can't both be true, you invent a third version where Mom had good intentions." Dad went quiet. I did not enjoy saying it. That was important. For years, I had imagined what it would feel like if he finally realized I had not rejected him the way he believed. In those fantasies, truth felt warm, vindicating, almost tender. The reality was colder. Every fact I recovered also showed me another moment when Dad could have asked one direct question and chose not to. "I loved your mother," he said finally. The past tense caught my attention, though I did not comment on it. "I still do," he corrected quickly. I trusted her. She handled the family things. That's the problem. What do you want me to say? I don't want a line. I want you to stop asking me to make this easier to look at. His voice lowered. I am looking at it. Then look at the part where you let another person manage your relationship with me. That ended the conversation for a while. Dad eventually said he needed time. This time, hearing those words did not make me feel abandoned. I told him to take it. I was no longer standing outside a door waiting for him to decide whether I was allowed in. By the end of that week, I had spoken directly to 4 relatives. The results were messy enough that I trusted them more than if everyone had immediately agreed with me. Claire believed Mom had misled her. Lauren believed that too, but still thought I had contributed to the estrangement by withdrawing. Mark wanted no part of a larger family conflict and kept repeating that Mom probably thought she was helping. Another cousin told me bluntly that whatever happened 6 years ago, airing recordings at Amber's wedding had been cruel. I didn't air it, I said. You played the rest of it. After Amber played my sentence to the room, you could have walked away. I could have. You didn't. No. There was no point pretending otherwise. I had made a choice in that ballroom. Amber had taken my words out of context in front of a room full of people, and I had restored the context in front of the same people. I did not regret it. But I also understood why someone who had attended a wedding rather than a family tribunal might wish both of us had handled it somewhere else. That distinction became useful. I did not need everyone to approve of my reaction in order for the evidence to remain true. The first real setback came 2 days later. Amber sent a message to a smaller family group that included Dad, Mom, Claire, Lauren, Mark, and a few others. I was not originally in the thread. Claire forwarded it to me after asking whether I wanted to see it. Amber wrote that she had made a terrible mistake at the wedding by playing the recording publicly. She said she was sorry the reception had turned into a spectacle. For a few sentences, I thought she might actually be taking responsibility. Then the message shifted. She wrote, "But Rachel is now using one bad choice I made to rewrite years of her own behavior and punish Mom. She has been telling everyone that she was pushed out of this family when the truth is that she repeatedly said she was done with us." Underneath that was a screenshot. My own name appeared at the top. My own message sat in the center of the screen. "I'm done with this family." There was no visible message above it. No date in the cropped image. No indication of what conversation had led to it. My stomach dropped anyway. I remembered saying it. Not the exact day at first, but the emotion came back immediately. Rage, exhaustion, the kind of certainty that feels clean only while you are inside it. Amber continued beneath the screenshot. "This is what we've dealt with for years. Every time Rachel gets angry, she cuts people off and then later says she was excluded. Mom has spent years trying to keep doors open for her. Now Rachel wants everyone to believe Mom somehow orchestrated all of this." Claire's text arrived seconds later. "I know screenshots can be misleading now, but did you say this?" I stared at the image. "Yes," I typed. It would have been easy to write. Not like that. It would have been easy to start defending before I even looked at the source. That was exactly the habit I was trying to break. So I sent another message. I said it. "I need to find the full conversation before I tell you what it meant." Claire replied, "Okay." That small response mattered more to me than she probably knew. I opened my personal message archive and searched the exact phrase. Nothing appeared. I tried a wider date range. Then I searched Amber's name and variations of "done with this family." My archive from those years was imperfect, because some messages had moved between devices, but I still had an old encrypted phone backup I had made when I replaced my previous device. Restoring my own data was not mysterious or clever. It was tedious. I spent more than an hour watching folders populate while trying not to decide what the answer would be before I saw it. During that time, Lauren texted me, "I'm going to be honest. That screenshot makes this look different. I know. Did you really mean it?" At the moment I sent it, probably. That's not exactly reassuring. It's not supposed to be. She did not respond after that. An hour later, Claire told me Mark had replied in the family thread, that he did not want to keep participating in a prosecution of Patricia. Another relative wrote that everyone had said things they regretted, and the family needed to stop digging. Amber answered almost immediately, thanking them for remembering there are two sides. I could feel control sliding back toward her. For the first time since the wedding, I understood how effective the old narrative still was. Amber did not need to prove Mom had never lied. She only needed to prove that I had sometimes been angry enough to sound exactly like the difficult, unforgiving woman they remembered. And she had proof. Real proof. That was the dangerous part. When my old messages finally finished restoring, I found the phrase in a conversation with Amber from early 2021. It was after Dad had told me he still was not ready to talk. Amber had contacted me supposedly to see whether I was coming to a small family gathering later that month. I opened the full thread. Amber, are you coming Sunday? Me. I haven't been invited. Amber, Mom said she talked to you. Me. She told me Dad still wants space. Amber. Then I guess that's your answer. Me. I'm not doing this through Mom anymore. Amber. You're the one making everything complicated. Me. I asked Dad directly. Amber. Mom said Dad doesn't want you around anyway. There it was. I stopped scrolling. The next message was mine. I'm done with this family. 3 minutes later, another message from me followed. If Dad wants to talk to me directly someday, he knows how to reach me. Until then, I'm not letting you and Mom keep telling me what everyone thinks. Amber had cropped both sides away. I read the thread again from the beginning. My sentence was still ugly. It was still absolute. I had said it, and I had meant some version of it in that moment. I was not going to pretend context transformed it into something gentle. But the context changed what it proved. It did not prove that I had announced a permanent no-contact boundary to the entire family. It proved that Amber had been carrying Mom's messages about Dad years before the wedding. More importantly, it showed something I had not fully registered at the time. Mom said Dad doesn't want you around anyway. Amber had not merely grown up inside the same communication system. She had participated in it. I saved the full thread as a PDF for myself, and then took a screenshot wide enough to show the messages before and after my sentence. Before sending it to anyone, I sat with it for several minutes. There was a version of revenge where I could have sent the entire conversation to the family group and written something sharp beneath it. Something like, since Amber likes context now, here's the rest. I could already imagine how satisfying it would feel. I did not do it. I sent the full thread only to Claire and Lauren because they had directly asked me about the cropped screenshot. Then I sent it to Dad because his name was the information being carried between us. To Claire, I wrote, I did say it. I was furious, and I'm not retracting that fact. But this is the conversation Amber cropped. To Lauren, I wrote the same thing. To Dad, I asked one question. Did you tell Mom or Amber in early 2021 that you never wanted me around again? Dad called less than 5 minutes later. No. I looked at Amber's old message on my screen. Then why was your daughter telling me Mom said you did? Dad did not answer. This time, neither did I. Dad stayed silent long enough that I checked whether the call had dropped. It hadn't. I could still hear the faint television in the background and the small sounds of him moving around his kitchen. Finally, he said, I didn't tell either of them that. I looked at the old thread on my laptop again, at Amber's message telling me Mom said Dad didn't want me around, and felt the strange relief of having one question answered immediately replaced by a worse one. Then somebody was speaking for you, I said. Dad answered. It looks that way. And I stopped him before he could soften it into another misunderstanding. No, somebody was telling me what you supposedly wanted, and somebody was telling you what I supposedly wanted. That's different. He did not argue. That mattered, because 3 days earlier he would have offered a possible innocent explanation before I finished the sentence. I told him I was sending him the full thread so he could read it himself. Then I made one thing clear. I'm not asking you to confront Mom for me. I'm not asking you to call Amber. I'm showing you something that uses your name, so you have a right to see it. Dad said he understood. Before we hung up, he asked whether I planned to send the full thread to the family group. I told him no. Amber already turned one sentence into a public performance. I'm not going to answer by doing the same thing with hers. After the call, I sent Claire and Lauren the uncropped conversation because both had directly asked whether I really wrote that I was done with the family. Claire replied first. That's not the same thing she showed us. Lauren took longer. When she finally called, her tone was careful. It changes the context, she said. But you still said it. I agreed. She sounded almost surprised. I told her I was not trying to transform myself into the reasonable saint of the Dawson family. I had been angry. I had said cruel things. I had walked away rather than keep fighting for relationships that felt humiliating. If we're going to compare what actually happened, I said, then my mistakes stay in the record too. Lauren was quiet for a moment. Then she said, You know what's weird? Lauren reminded me of something I had spent years treating as background noise. Whenever I became frustrated enough to object, Amber became easygoing by comparison. Whenever I said no, Amber became generous. Whenever I refused to attend something under conditions I thought were manipulative, Amber became the daughter who always showed up. We had been measured against each other for so long that one of us looking difficult automatically improved the other's position. Once Lauren said it aloud, memories began arranging themselves into a pattern I should have recognized earlier. At a Christmas dinner years before the estrangement, Mom had asked both of us to stay late and help clean. Amber said she had promised friends she would meet them. I said I had an early drive back to Charlottesville, but stayed another 40 minutes anyway. When I finally said I needed to leave, Mom sighed and told Amber, At least one of my daughters knows how to make family a priority. She meant Amber because Amber had spent the evening laughing with relatives before leaving for her friends, while I had spent part of it questioning Mom about something she had promised Dad she would handle. The facts were almost irrelevant. Amber was pleasant. I was difficult. The label survived whatever actually happened. Another time, Amber borrowed something of mine without asking and returned it damaged. I told her she needed to replace it. Mom called me rigid. Amber offered to buy me lunch instead, and suddenly she was the generous sister trying to make peace while I was the one keeping score. At the time, I thought those were isolated irritations. Looking back, I could see how useful they had been for Amber. She did not have to prove she was especially patient, kind, or loyal. She only had to stand beside a version of me that had already been labeled demanding. That did not mean every good thing about my sister was fake. One of the most dangerous mistakes I could have made was flattening Amber into a villain because she had flattened me into one. She could be funny. She remembered birthdays. She had sat with Aunt Claire during a difficult medical test when the rest of us were working. She had done genuinely kind things, but kindness had also become part of her identity in the family. And identities are hard to surrender once people reward you for them. If Amber was the good daughter, somebody had to be the bad one. My phone rang that afternoon. The name on the screen was Evan. For a second, I considered letting it go to voicemail. He was my sister's husband, barely a week into a marriage that had already become a family argument, and I had no interest in turning him into an ally. But the wedding had been his too. Amber had used their reception to play my recording. He had a right to ask questions about his own event. I answered, Rachel, I'm not calling to talk about you and Amber, he said immediately. That's probably smart. He gave a humorless laugh. I'm calling about the audio. I waited. Evan said the wedding planner had contacted him because he had asked whether the recording Amber played had been edited before it reached the hotel. I need to understand something, he said. When you rewound it, was that extra part in the same file? Yes. So nobody at the hotel added it? No. The source loaded in the system contained the whole exchange. Did you give them that file? No. Did your mom? I don't know. He paused. Amber handled the media package. That did not surprise me, but I did not say so. I asked why he was checking now. Because she told me the hotel played the wrong version. I sat straighter. What exactly did she say? That she had made a clip for the tribute, and somebody must have loaded a draft instead. I looked at my notes from the wedding. The DJ told me he was given a cue point. Evan became quiet. I continued. That means the file itself may not have been cut. Someone told him where to start. Can you prove that? No. I could hear the frustration in his breathing. I added, but the planner might be able to. If there was a media cue sheet or written instruction, that would belong to the wedding records, not to me. Would you ask her? No. The answer came out faster than he expected. Why? Because it was your wedding. If you want to know how your reception was run, you should ask your planner. I'm not going to recruit your vendors against your wife. Evan went quiet again. When he spoke, his tone had changed. Okay, I almost felt sorry for him. He had married Amber expecting a honeymoon period, and instead was reviewing AV instructions like an internal audit. But sympathy did not make him my responsibility. Before we hung up, I said, whatever you find, don't send it to me because you think I need ammunition. If it directly concerns what she played about me, then send it. Otherwise, deal with your marriage with your wife. I understand. I hoped he did. The email arrived the following morning. Evan had forwarded a message from the wedding planner. I checked the thread carefully before opening the attachment because I wanted to know who had actually written what. The planner's original email was from the week before the wedding. It contained the final schedule and a simple media cue sheet for speeches, slideshows, and special moments. Most entries were ordinary. First dance. Father-daughter dance. Bridesmaid slideshow. Then I reached the sisters' tribute. The source file was listed by name. Beside it was an instruction from Amber. Start media at 27 seconds. Below that, in a separate note, she had written, do not play from beginning. I leaned back from the screen. There was no dramatic confession, just an ordinary event instruction. Amber had sent the hotel the full source file and specified exactly where playback should begin. The first 27 seconds had never been deleted. They had simply been placed before the cue point. She had trusted the instruction to control what the room heard, and she had never expected anyone to rewind it. I saved the email in the same folder as the other records. I did not forward it to Claire. I did not send it to Lauren. I did not put it in the family thread. I sent it to Dad. Then I wrote, this is the cue sheet Evan obtained from the planner. It concerns what happened at the wedding. I'm sending it because you were there and because Mom is saying Amber acted alone without a plan. Dad responded less than 10 minutes later. She planned it. I stared at the words. Yes, I wrote. That was all. The strongest evidence usually needed the fewest adjectives. Amber called me that evening. She did not say hello. What did you send, Evan? I was standing in my kitchen chopping vegetables for dinner. I put the knife down before answering because her voice had enough energy in it to make me start moving faster without realizing it. I didn't send Evan anything. He knew about the cue sheet. He asked the planner, because of you. No, because your wedding reception played a private recording in front of his family. You told him the file wasn't edited. He asked me a factual question. I answered it. Amber laughed once, sharp and disbelieving. You always do this. Do what? You make people feel stupid for trusting us. The sentence was so strange that I almost asked her to repeat it. Instead, I said, who is us? You know exactly what I mean. No, actually, I don't. Mom, me, the family. You take everything apart until everybody feels like an idiot for believing the person standing in front of them. I leaned against the counter. Checking whether something is true isn't making someone stupid. That's how you make yourself feel superior. Amber, you told the hotel not to play the first 27 seconds because those 27 seconds showed you were trying to provoke me into giving you a sentence you could use. You still said it. I never denied that. You hoped my wedding would fall apart after you told me Mom had instructed you to wait until I gave you something usable. You were already angry. Yes, you already hated the wedding. No, you hated what it represented. I let that sit for a moment. What did it represent? That I was happy. There it was. Not the full truth, but something closer to Amber's actual wound than anything she had said at the reception. You really believe I couldn't stand you being happy? I think you can't stand anyone thinking I'm the good one. I almost responded too quickly. Instead, I took a breath. The good one? You know what I mean. I want to hear you say it. She groaned. This is exactly what I'm talking about. You force people to define every word, then you use the definition against them. No, I'm asking what you mean when you say you're the good one. Amber was quiet long enough that I could hear a car passing somewhere on her end. Finally, she said, I stayed. I helped Mom. I showed up for Dad. I went to the family things. I didn't spend 6 years acting like everyone was beneath me. I didn't think you were beneath me. That's how you made people feel. And that makes what you did at the wedding okay? I said it was a mistake. You said playing it publicly was a mistake. You haven't said framing it was a mistake. She exhaled hard. Because it wasn't framing, you said the words. I looked out the kitchen window at the dark glass, reflecting my own face. If context doesn't matter, why did you tell the planner not to play it? Amber did not answer. I continued. You could have played the entire conversation. It was a wedding, Rachel. Nobody needed to hear 20 minutes of us fighting. You didn't cut 20 minutes. You started 27 seconds late. Because that was the relevant part. To your story. To what people needed to understand. There it was again. What did they need to understand? That you weren't there because you suddenly wanted to reconcile. You came in already judging everything. You've been doing that for years. I came because Dad asked me directly. And you were probably waiting for one thing to go wrong so you could prove you were right about us. I could feel the conversation pulling toward the old shape, where I defended my entire personality, while Amber defended one specific action. I stopped it. You told the planner to hide the context. I told her where the clip started. You told the room I was jealous. You are jealous. You told Evan the hotel played the wrong version. That silenced her. I waited. Her voice was lower when she spoke again. He told you that? He asked whether the hotel could have made a mistake. I answered what I knew. Stay out of my marriage. I am. No, you're not. You love this. Love what? Watching him question me. I thought about Evan's voice on the phone. There had been nothing triumphant in it. He sounded like a man trying to understand why his new wife had used their reception as a stage for a family grievance. I didn't ask him to question you, I said. You gave him a reason. Amber inhaled sharply. You've always wanted this, she said. You've always wanted somebody to finally look at me and realize I'm not as good as everyone thinks. The accusation should have made me defensive. Instead, I heard something underneath it. How good do they think you are? Don't. No, you brought it up. You know what Mom says about you? I've spent a week learning that what Mom says people say is not especially reliable. Amber ignored that. She says you don't understand loyalty. I almost laughed. What does loyalty mean to you? It means sometimes you trust people without demanding receipts. The irony was so complete that I did not need to point it out. Amber continued, Dad trusted Mom. Claire trusted Mom. Evan trusted me. That doesn't make them stupid. No, it doesn't. But you're making them feel stupid. I'm showing them what actually happened. Same thing. That answer stayed with me. I lowered my voice. No, Amber. It's only the same thing if being loyal requires not checking whether somebody lied to you. She went silent. For a second, I thought she might hang up. Instead, she said, You think you're going to win this because you have files. I'm not trying to win. Of course you are. If I wanted to win, I would have sent that cue sheet to everyone. Another pause. You didn't? No. Why not? Because Evan asked about his wedding. Dad was part of the family issue, and nobody else needs it unless you keep telling them the hotel made a mistake. Her breathing changed. I could almost hear her recalculating. You're threatening me. No, I'm telling you I'm not protecting a false version if you keep repeating it. You always have to get the last word. I don't. I picked up the knife again, then stopped because I realized how absurdly normal the kitchen looked around me while my sister accused me of destroying her marriage. Amber, I'm going to ask you one question. What? When you told me Mom said Dad didn't want me around in 2021, did Dad ever say that to you? Silence. Amber, I'm not doing this. You're the one who sent the screenshot. I said I'm not doing this. Then answer one thing. Did Dad tell you directly that he never wanted me around again? You were making everyone miserable. That wasn't my question. You see? This is why nobody can talk to you." Then she hung up. I stood there with the phone in my hand for several seconds before placing it face down on the counter. I hadn't gotten a confession, but I had gotten something more useful. Amber had told me what loyalty meant to her, trusting the story without checking it. And she had finally admitted how much of her identity rested on being the daughter who stayed while I became the daughter who left. If the truth about why I left changed, that comparison changed with it. The next morning, Dad called before I reached the office. "I saw the cue sheet," he said. I figured. "I've been going through old messages." I slowed as I crossed the parking lot. "Why?" "Because I keep thinking about what you said. About how many times I let somebody tell me what another person meant." I stopped beside my car, Dad continued. "I still have messages from 2020. Personal account. Your mother and I used to text when I was at work because I couldn't always take calls." "Okay." I found one from the week after the argument. My grip tightened around the phone. "What does it say?" "I'm going to send it to you. Dad, I want you to see the whole exchange yourself." That choice alone told me he was starting to understand. I waited while he forwarded the screenshots. The first image arrived while we were still on the phone. It showed a conversation between Dad and Mom from 6 years earlier. I checked the date. It was 2 days after Mom had sent him the shortened audio. Dad had written that he was still angry but did not like how things had ended. Mom replied that I needed time to understand how badly I had hurt everyone. Dad wrote that maybe space was best for a few days. Then, several messages lower, I saw the last line visible in the screenshot. Dad had written, "Maybe I should call Rachel myself." The image ended there. Dad sent the second screenshot before I could ask for it. His old message was still visible at the top. "Maybe I should call Rachel myself." Underneath it, Mom had replied, "Don't chase her. If she wants to talk, she knows how." Dad had written that he did not want things to become permanent over one ugly argument. Patricia answered that I needed to decide whether I actually wanted a family before everyone kept bending around me. Then came the line that made me stop breathing for a second. "She won't call. Pride is the one thing about Rachel you can always count on." I read it once, then again. The third time, I stopped reading it as an accusation and started reading it as a prediction. Mom had known me well enough to know exactly what I would do after Dad rejected me. I would not beg. I would not show up at the house demanding to be heard. I would not keep calling someone who had twice told me he wanted distance. She had not merely hoped I would disappear. She had calculated that once Dad pushed me away hard enough, my own pride would keep me gone. Dad was still on the phone. "Rachel, I'm here. I don't remember seeing it that way at the time. How did you see it?" He took a breath. "Your mother was telling me not to make things worse." I looked at the screenshot again. "She told you I wouldn't call." "Yes. And she told me you didn't want me around." "I know that now." "No. I need you to hear the difference. She didn't just carry bad information between us. She was telling each of us what the other would do, then making sure we behaved exactly the way she predicted." Dad did not answer immediately. I stood from my desk and walked to the window, because sitting still felt impossible. Outside, people were moving through the afternoon as if nothing had changed. A delivery truck stopped across the street. A woman in running clothes waited for the light. Somewhere below my apartment, a dog barked twice. I had spent years believing my estrangement from Dad was a tragic but straightforward result of two stubborn people who had hurt each other and refused to move first. The truth was not that clean. Someone had been standing between us, and she knew exactly where to press. What made the line hurt was that Mom was not wrong about me. Pride had always been one of my strongest defenses. I had spent my childhood being the older daughter who solved her own problems. By the time Amber was old enough to need rides, homework help, or money for something she had forgotten to plan for, I was already living in a different city and building a life that depended on competence. I hated asking twice. I hated repeating myself after someone had made a choice. If somebody said they did not want me somewhere, my instinct was to believe them and leave before they could enjoy saying it again. After Dad told me not to come to the house, I had written messages I never sent. I remembered them suddenly. One was an apology that still insisted he had misunderstood me. Another was angrier. Another simply asked whether he wanted to have coffee without Mom or Amber there. I deleted all three because I could hear his voice telling me he needed space. Months later, I sent the one email I could live with. He rejected the conversation again. After that, I decided silence was dignity. Mom knew I would. That did not make the choice entirely hers. I stopped trying, I told Dad. He sounded surprised by the change in direction. After I told you to, twice. Yes, I could have tried a third time. Rachel, I'm not going to blame you for that. I'm not asking you to. I'm separating what happened. I returned to my desk and looked at the old messages. Mom gave us false information. You chose not to verify it. I chose to withdraw after you rejected me. Those are 3 different decisions. Dad was quiet. I continued because I needed the distinction as much as he did. If I pretend I had no choices, then I'm doing the same thing Mom does. I did have choices. I just made mine based on a lie I didn't know was there. That's fair. What isn't fair is using my pride as proof that Mom didn't manipulate anything. She counted on it. I see that. I closed my eyes briefly. Do you? Another pause. I'm starting to. That was more honest than I expected. Dad asked what I wanted to do next. A week earlier, I might have answered that I wanted everybody to know. I might have wanted the entire family seated around a table while I played recordings and displayed screenshots until no one could deny what happened. Now, that sounded too much like another performance controlled by whoever held the evidence. I want Mom to stop speaking for both of us, I said. Dad replied, I can do that. You can stop letting her. Yes, that isn't the same as confronting her. His silence returned. There it was. Dad could acknowledge a problem in private. Acting on it was something else. I'm not asking you to confront her today, I said. But if your solution is to know the truth privately and let the same pattern continue publicly, then nothing changes. I need time to think. You can have time. He sounded almost wary. You're not angry that I'm saying that? I'm not waiting outside your door anymore, Dad. That ended the conversation more cleanly than an argument would have. I hung up and sat with the screenshot for another 10 minutes before saving it to the same folder as everything else. I named the file by date and source, not by what I thought it proved. That small choice steadied me. Evidence first. Meaning second. Mom's family meeting invitation arrived that evening. She sent it in a group text that included Dad, Amber, me, Claire, Lauren, Mark, and several other relatives who had been pulled into the fallout. The language sounded polished enough that I could imagine her drafting it several times. This family has been hurt by misunderstandings, old resentments, and the way private conversations have been shared without compassion. I think we need to sit down together, face to face, and heal properly. No screenshots, no recordings, no accusations. Just family. The location was my parents' house in Richmond the following Sunday. I almost laughed when I read it. Not because healing was funny. Because the structure was exactly the structure Mom had always preferred. Everyone in one room. Patricia deciding when the conversation started. Patricia deciding what counted as an accusation. Patricia deciding that source material itself was somehow less honorable than memory. She wanted us to put down the one thing that had finally allowed everyone to compare what they had been told. Amber reacted first with a thumbs up. Claire wrote, I think people should talk directly before we all sit in a room. Mom answered that talking separately was exactly how things became distorted. I stared at that sentence until I felt almost impressed by it. Lauren asked whether Rachel had agreed to come. Mom answered before I could. I hope she will. I typed slowly because I knew whatever I wrote might be forwarded. I won't participate in that format. Mom called me within 30 seconds. I let it ring once before answering. You saw my message, she said. Yes. And? I answered. Rachel, this is bigger than your preferences now. That's exactly why I'm not doing it. Her voice tightened. Everyone is exhausted. Then don't gather everyone into a room and make them argue. I'm trying to stop people from attacking each other with screenshots. No. You're trying to remove the records and go back to competing memories. That is an incredibly cynical thing to say. It's also accurate. Do you hear yourself? Yes. She let out a breath that sounded deliberately patient. What would you prefer? If you told Claire something that wasn't true, talk to Claire. If you told Mark something that wasn't true, talk to Mark. If you told Dad something that wasn't true, talk to Dad. One relationship at a time. That will take months. Maybe. You want to drag this out. I want people to stop using a family meeting as a shortcut around accountability. Mom's voice went cold. And you get to decide what accountability looks like? No. Claire decides what she needs from you. Dad decides what he needs. Mark decides what he needs. That's the point. She was quiet. I knew what bothered her about the answer. There was no central stage. No single speech that could repair her reputation. No moment when the family could vote on whether she had been a good mother. If everybody dealt with her separately, she could not control what one person knew about what she had told another. You're punishing me, she said. No, you won't even sit in the same room with me. I'll sit in a room with you. Then come Sunday. I said I won't participate in that format. You and I can talk. That was not the answer she expected. The silence stretched. Fine, she said. When? I looked at my calendar. Saturday afternoon. Charlottesville. Somewhere public. You want me to drive all the way there? It's a little over an hour. That isn't the point. No. It isn't. She hung up without choosing a place. 20 minutes later, she texted the name of a cafe near the edge of downtown Charlottesville. I arrived early on Saturday because I did not want to walk in flustered. The cafe was busy enough that neither of us could create a scene without attracting attention, but quiet enough for conversation. I chose a table near the window and ordered coffee. Mom arrived 7 minutes late in a navy coat I recognized from Christmas photographs. She looked tired, not theatrically destroyed. Tired in the ordinary way people look when they have spent a week defending choices they believed nobody would ever examine. She sat without hugging me. Are you recording this? She asked. No. Why not? Because I don't need a confession. Her eyebrows rose. That sounds ominous. It isn't supposed to. Mom placed her handbag beside her chair and folded her hands on the table. Then what do you need? I want to understand what you thought you were doing. I was trying to keep this family together. The speed of her answer told me she had said it to herself many times. You told Claire I wanted no contact. You had stopped speaking to everyone. I had stopped speaking to Dad after he rejected 2 attempts to talk. That wasn't the same thing. You stopped coming to family events. After you told me Dad didn't want me there. He didn't want conflict. That isn't the same thing either. Mom looked away toward the window. You always do that. Do what? Reduce everything to wording. I'm asking whether the words were true. Families don't function like courtrooms, Rachel. I know. People say things they don't mean. They get angry. They need time. Sometimes someone has to understand what everybody is actually trying to say instead of forcing them to repeat the worst version of it. There was the logic. Not evil. Not madness. A philosophy. You thought you knew what everybody meant better than they did. I knew your father. So did I. You knew one part of him. And Amber? She was 22. She was emotional. She felt like you and your father had spent her whole life talking down to her. Did that make it okay to send Dad an edited recording? Mom's face changed almost imperceptibly. I didn't fabricate your voice. You removed the words that explained the sentence. I sent your father the part that concerned him. The sentence did not concern him the way you told him it did. He heard you call the situation pathetic. You told him I called him pathetic. I told him you had said something deeply disrespectful. I leaned back. That was not denial. I did not rush into the gap. I wanted to hear what she would say if I did not give her another accusation to defend against. Mom continued. Your father was already hurt. You kept pushing. You always push until people say things they regret. And then you act shocked that they're upset. Was he going to call me? Her eyes narrowed slightly. What? I saw the text. He wrote, maybe I should call Rachel myself. Mom looked down at the table. You answered, don't chase her. Then you wrote, She won't call. Pride is the one thing about Rachel you can always count on. Her expression did not collapse. She did not gasp or deny writing it. Instead, she said, "Was I wrong?" The question hurt more than denial would have. "No," I said, "you weren't." She looked almost relieved. "I didn't call." "Exactly. Because Dad told me he wanted space. And because you would rather lose someone than risk hearing no again." I absorbed the blow instead of throwing one back. Mom had always been able to find the part of an argument that was true and use it like a shield around everything else. "Yes," I said. "That's one of my flaws." She blinked. "I hate asking twice. I hate chasing people. I would rather walk away than beg someone to believe me. I know that about myself." "Then why are you acting like I controlled you?" "Because knowing how I would react is not permission to manufacture the conditions that made me react." Her mouth tightened. "You told Dad not to call because you knew I probably wouldn't call either. Then you told me Dad didn't want me around. You didn't just predict my pride, you used it. I was stopping another fight. You were stopping a conversation. Because every conversation between you two became a fight. How would you know? You were carrying half of them between us." Mom leaned closer. "Your father couldn't take another fight with you. Did he tell you that?" "I know my husband." "That wasn't my question." She pushed her coffee away, though she had barely touched it. "This is why people find talking to you exhausting. Because I ask whether the statement is true. Because you refuse to understand intent." "I understand your intent. I'm asking why your intent gave you the right to control information." Her jaw tightened. "Amber was barely holding it together that year," she said. "She thought you hated her. Your father felt like you had no respect for him. You were furious with everyone. Somebody had to stop the whole thing from exploding. By deciding what each person was allowed to know? By giving everybody time. 6 years? That wasn't my choice." I looked at her. She held my gaze. "You could have called. So could Dad. He was hurt. So was I. You were the one who always said you didn't need anybody." I almost responded defensively. Then I remembered the text. "Pride is the one thing about Rachel you can always count on." "I said I could take care of myself," I replied. "That isn't the same as saying I didn't want a father." Mom's face shifted for the first time. Something uncomfortable passed through it, but it disappeared too quickly for me to name. "You make everything sound cruel when you put it that way." "I'm not putting it any way. I'm telling you what happened to me. And I'm telling you what happened to everyone else." "No, you've been doing that for years. That's the problem." She sat back. For a moment, the cafe noises filled the space between us, cups touching saucers, a blender at the counter, someone laughing at another table. I realized I had spent most of my life arguing with Mom inside family settings, where the environment itself encouraged surrender. A kitchen where dinner was getting cold. A birthday where people wanted cake. A holiday where nobody wanted tension. She always had the clock on her side. Eventually someone said, "Can we just move on?" There was nothing to move on to in that cafe. Mom looked at me and said, "You think everything would have been better if I had stayed out of it?" "Yes. That is incredibly naive." "Maybe. Your father hates confrontation." "I know. Amber takes everything personally." "I know. And you can cut people to pieces with a sentence, and then sit there insisting you were technically correct." "That one landed too." "I know." Her frustration increased because I was not defending myself. "Then you understand why I stepped in?" "No. I understand why you thought you needed to." "What's the difference?" "The difference is that everybody else's weakness became your authority." Mom stared at me. I continued. "Dad avoided confrontation, so you spoke for him. Amber was emotional, so you softened consequences for her. I was proud, so you assumed I wouldn't check. Every flaw we had became a reason you got to decide what information reached us. I kept this family functioning. There it was. Not whispered. Not accidentally admitted. Declared. I looked at her for a long moment. "You kept it functioning around you. That's insulting." "It's what happened. Do you have any idea how many times I kept your father from saying something that would have destroyed his relationship with Amber? How many times I convinced Amber not to send you some awful message? How many times I kept your relatives from getting pulled into your fights. I'm sure there were times you helped. She looked surprised again. I'm not saying every intervention was malicious. I'm saying you started believing helping gave you ownership. I never wanted ownership. You wanted control. I wanted peace. Peace for who? For everyone. No, peace from conflict. Those aren't the same thing. Mom shook her head as if I were deliberately refusing something obvious. You don't understand what it takes to keep people connected. I understand what it costs when the connection depends on false information. Her eyes hardened. So, what happens now? You cut me off too? I haven't decided. That's convenient. No. What would be convenient is making the decision while I'm angry so I never have to think about it again. She folded her arms. I'm not asking you to forgive me, she said. That's good. I'm asking you to admit there are two sides. There are more than two. What does that mean? It means you did what you did. Dad made his choices. Amber made hers. I made mine. Nobody gets to hide behind somebody else. Mom looked toward the door. I thought the conversation was over. Then she said, You're treating your father like he was some helpless victim. I'm not. You are. I told him the opposite. She gave a humorless laugh. Then you haven't asked the right questions yet. Something in her tone changed the temperature of the conversation. What questions? She picked up her handbag. Ask him how many times he thought something didn't make sense. I already know he questioned the recording. That isn't what I mean. What do you mean? Mom stood and slipped the strap over her shoulder. You think I spent 6 years fooling a man who spent his entire career checking calculations twice before signing his name? I stared at her. Dad trusted you. Yes. That doesn't mean he knew what you were doing. I didn't say he knew everything. Then say what you mean. She looked down at me with an expression I could not read. For once, I refused to guess. If you think your father was completely fooled, she said, ask him why he never called when he knew some of it didn't make sense. Then she walked out of the cafe and left me sitting beside 2 untouched cups of coffee, wondering how much of the story I had just rebuilt was still missing. I called Dad the next morning and asked him to meet me somewhere that did not belong to either of us. I did not want my parents' kitchen around us, with Mom's coffee mugs in the cabinet and 6 years of unfinished conversations hiding in every doorway. I did not want my apartment either. If I was going to ask him how much he had known and how much he had chosen not to know, I needed a place where neither of us could retreat into habit. We settled on a quiet restaurant halfway between Charlottesville and Richmond, the kind of place that did most of its business at dinner and was nearly empty in the middle of the afternoon. Dad arrived before me. When I walked in, he was sitting in a booth near the back with an old laptop bag beside him and a manila folder on the table. He stood when he saw me, then seemed uncertain whether to hug me. I solved the problem by sitting down. It was not punishment. I simply did not want physical affection to rush us past a conversation we had avoided for years. Dad understood. He sat across from me and touched the folder with 2 fingers. I went through more of the old messages. He said, Not because your mother told me to. Because you were right. I kept saying I didn't remember, and I realized I was using that as an excuse not to look. I thanked him for looking, but I did not tell him he was brave. Looking at your own records after 6 years was not bravery. It was overdue. He opened the laptop first. Dad had always kept personal email longer than anyone needed. Even before retirement, he had been the kind of engineer who saved warranties for appliances he no longer owned. That habit had become useful. He showed me the exchange we had already discussed, the one where he wrote that maybe he should call me himself, and Mom answered that I would not call because of my pride. Then he scrolled down. There were more messages from the same week. Nothing dramatic. That was what made them harder to dismiss. Dad had written, Something about the recording still bothers me. I don't think Rachel would say it that way. Mom answered, You heard her voice. Dad wrote, I know, but I think I missed part of what they were arguing about. Mom replied, Do you really want another fight? Just to hear her explain why everyone else misunderstood her again? I looked at him. You saw that. Yes. And you still didn't call? No. I expected him to explain immediately. Dad had spent most of his life answering uncomfortable questions with context. Instead, he sat with it for a moment. I was angry, he said, and embarrassed. Embarrassed about what? That I might have overreacted. I waited. He looked down at the screen. If I called you and you proved I had misunderstood the recording, then I would have to admit I told you to stay away because I believed something without checking it. That would have been uncomfortable. Yes, more uncomfortable than not speaking to me? At the time, apparently. The answer hurt, but I respected it more than another excuse about Mom protecting him. Dad rubbed his thumb along the edge of the folder. He looked older than he had at Amber's wedding, though only a few weeks had passed. Maybe I was simply seeing him without the role I had assigned him for years. In my mind, Dad had either been the father who rejected me, or the father who had been manipulated away from me. Both versions were easier than the man sitting across from me, who had been hurt, misled, suspicious, proud, frightened of admitting a mistake, and willing to let silence make decisions for him. What happened after that? I asked. He pulled a printout from the folder. A few months later, Claire called me. I leaned forward. She asked how you were doing. You hadn't heard from me. No. She said she thought you were still asking about me. My chest tightened. Claire told you that? She didn't say you wanted to reconcile. She just said something like, Rachel still asks whether you're okay, so maybe this isn't as permanent as everyone thinks. What did you do? I asked your mother. I stared at him. Dad gave a small nod as if he knew exactly what I was thinking. That was the mistake. What did Mom say? He looked at the printout. She said you wanted information, not a relationship. I did not speak. She said you were asking because you didn't want to look cruel, but you had made it clear you weren't ready to talk to me. Did Claire tell you that? No. Did I tell you that? No. Did you ask either of us? No. The waiter came over to ask whether we wanted anything besides coffee. Dad ordered iced tea. I ordered water. Neither of us touched the menus. When the waiter left, I said, Why didn't you ask Claire what I actually said? Dad looked out the window. Because your mother's explanation fit what I already believed. There it was. I had spent years trying to understand how lies could survive inside a family of intelligent adults. I had assumed the answer had to be sophisticated manipulation, something carefully constructed and nearly impossible to detect. Dad's answer was simpler. A lie survived because it fit what he already believed. Mom did not need to create a new story every time. She only had to keep feeding the old one. What did you believe about me? I asked. That you were angry enough to stay away. I was. That you thought I had chosen Amber over you. I did. That you would rather cut us off than admit you had hurt people. I sat back. That last one came from Mom. Some of it did. Some? Dad took a long breath. Some of it came from me. I looked at him without helping. He continued. You could be very hard when you thought you were right. I still can. I know. That isn't an answer. Dad nodded. I told myself you were the one who left because it was easier than admitting I had told you to go. The words landed differently from Mom's accusation. She had used my pride to justify what she did. Dad was naming his own. I called you after Mom told me you didn't want me at the house, I said. I asked you directly whether it was your decision. I remember. You said it was. I know. Then months later, I emailed you and said I would talk if we could do it directly without Mom carrying messages. I remember that too. You told me you weren't ready. Yes. I folded my hands on the table. So when people say I disappeared, those two things have to stay in the story. They do. I am not going to accept a version where Mom manipulated everything and you were waiting helplessly for me to come home. I'm not asking you to. You might not mean to, but every time you say she lied to you, there's a temptation to stop there. Dad looked at me. I know. No, Dad, I need more than that. His expression tightened, not in anger but in discomfort. Good. There were conversations where discomfort was the only sign you had reached the truth. He pushed the laptop slightly away from himself. Your mother lied to me, he said. She gave me edited information. She told me things you supposedly wanted that you never said. But I chose the version that required the least courage from me. I did not move. Dad kept going. If I believed you had cut us off, I didn't have to risk calling and hearing you reject me. I didn't have to admit I might have been wrong about the recording. I didn't have to tell your mother I didn't trust what she was telling me. I could be angry and call it respect for your boundaries. For 6 years, I had wanted him to understand. I had imagined that understanding as relief. Instead, I felt something close to grief. He understood now because he had finally looked directly at a choice that could not be undone. Mom lied, I said. You still chose what to do with the doubt. Yes. You had doubts more than once. Yes. And every time, you asked her what they meant. Yes. Instead of asking me. Yes. His eyes were wet, but he did not look away. I appreciated that. I did not want tears to become another form of escape. I'm sorry, he said. I waited for the rest. Nothing came. No, but your mother. No, but you were difficult. No, but we were all hurting. Just the apology. That mattered. I looked down at my hands. I have something to own too. Dad immediately shook his head. Rachel, you don't have to make this equal. I'm not. He stopped. I called after the first fight, I said. Then I tried again by email months later. After you rejected me the second time, I decided I would never try again. You had every reason. That doesn't mean I had no choice. Dad opened his mouth, but I held up a hand. Let me finish. Mom knew I hated chasing people. She knew I would rather walk away than ask someone a third time to believe me. She used that. But I still chose what I did after you pushed me away. I could have called Claire. I could have asked Mark whether Mom was telling everyone I wanted no contact. I could have sent you the original recording instead of assuming you wouldn't listen. I didn't. Because I made it clear I didn't want you to. Yes. And because after that, pride became convenient for me too. Dad frowned slightly. I told myself I was protecting my dignity. Most of the time I was. But eventually that story meant I never had to risk anything either. I got to say, they chose Amber. They don't want me. Fine, I built a good life, and I'm proud of that. But there were moments when I used independence to avoid finding out whether anything had changed. Dad was quiet. I looked at him. I can own the choice I made after you pushed me away. I won't own the lie that pushed me there. He nodded slowly. You shouldn't. I also won't accept blame for not trying a third, fourth, or fifth time after you directly told me no. You shouldn't. And if we rebuild anything, I'm not doing it by pretending the last 6 years were just a misunderstanding. They weren't. That was the first time he said it without qualification. The waiter brought our drink. Either of us had ordered food, and I was grateful when he left quickly. Dad stirred his iced tea, even though there was nothing in it that needed stirring. What happens now? He asked. I almost smiled because the question sounded like him. A problem had been identified. He wanted the next step. I don't know what we become. His face fell slightly, but he nodded. I'm willing to find out, I continued. That's different. What do you need from me? Direct communication. He waited. If you want to see me, you call me. Not Mom, not Amber, not Claire, you. Okay. If you're angry with me, you tell me. I can do that. If Mom says I said something, ask me before deciding what it means. I will. If I say no to a family event, it means no to that event. It doesn't mean I hate the family. And if I don't attend something because someone else says you don't want me there, that ends now. You invite me or you don't. Dad nodded. And I'm not going to prove forgiveness by showing up to every dinner. I wouldn't ask you to. You might not. Mom will. His mouth tightened. I continued. I am not going to sit through family meetings where she decides we all need to heal on the same schedule. I understand. No intermediaries. Dad repeated it quietly. No intermediaries. I held his gaze. That includes me. What do you mean? I'm not going to become the new person everybody calls to explain what Mom did or why Amber said something. If Claire has a problem with Mom, Claire talks to Mom. If you want to know what Amber meant, ask Amber. Dad gave a tired half smile. You've really thought about this. I've had 6 years. The smile disappeared. I'm sorry, he said again. This time, I let the apology sit without examining it. Not because everything was fixed, but because there was nothing useful in making him perform remorse until I felt satisfied. Trust would not be rebuilt by the quality of one conversation. It would be rebuilt by whether he did the boring things afterward. Whether he called directly. Whether he questioned information before acting on it. Whether he could tolerate conflict without handing it to someone else to manage. Dad reached into the folder again and pulled out another printed exchange. There's one more thing. I looked at it. This is from 2023, he said. Your mother and I were planning the anniversary dinner. I remembered it immediately. Dad pointed to a message where he had asked, "Has anyone heard from Rachel?" Mom replied, "She's not coming. She still says she isn't ready for family events." Dad had answered, "Did she tell you that today?" Mom wrote, "Not in those exact words, but I know what she means." I stared at the final line. Dad said, "I noticed that. Not in those exact words." Yes. What did you do? I let it go. Why? He did not need as long this time. Because if I pushed, I might have had to call you. And risk what? Finding out you wanted to come. The honesty was brutal. If you wanted to come, then I would have to explain why I had let things go on that long. I nodded. That's what Mom meant. What? When she said you knew more than I thought, she didn't mean you knew she was lying about everything. No. She meant you saw enough inconsistencies to know something might be wrong. Yes. And you looked away. Yes. There was nothing left to argue about. I felt angry. I also felt strangely calmer than I had since the wedding. Anger based on uncertainty had always made me restless. This was different. I knew where responsibility belonged. Dad reached for his glass, then stopped. I don't expect you to forgive me. Because I admitted this. Good. I hope someday you do. Maybe. He nodded. That answer would have devastated the version of Dad I remembered from 6 years earlier. He had always liked resolution. A bridge either passed inspection or it didn't. A problem was solved or unsolved. Relationships did not work that way. Maybe that was something both of us had needed to learn. We eventually ordered food because the waiter came back for the 3rd time and looked increasingly concerned about the 2 people occupying a booth with nothing but emotional damage and beverages. Dad chose a sandwich. I ordered soup. The conversation shifted for perhaps 15 minutes into ordinary territory. He asked about my work. I asked whether he still went fishing with a former colleague. It felt awkward, almost more intimate than the confrontation. For years, I had known Dad mainly as a wound. Sitting across from him while he complained about the price of replacement parts for his old lawnmower reminded me that there had once been a relationship underneath the argument. I did not confuse that feeling with reconciliation. When we left the restaurant, Dad walked me to my car. He stopped several feet away, rather than assuming a hug. "I'll call you," he said. "Okay." Me. I understood what he meant. Good. He started toward his car, then turned back. I looked at him. I should have called. My throat tightened. "Yes," I said. "You should have." He nodded once and walked away. I sat in my car for several minutes before starting the engine. I had imagined that conversation in dozens of forms over the years. In none of them had Dad admitted cowardice so plainly. In none of them had I admitted how much pride had helped me survive and also helped me stay gone. The truth had not reunited us. It had simply given us a clean place to begin, if we both chose to. My phone started vibrating before I pulled out of the parking lot. At first, I thought Dad had forgotten something. It was Claire. Then another notification appeared from Lauren. Then one from Dad, even though I could see his car still parked across the lot. I opened Claire's first. "Amber is sending screenshots to people. A lot of them." Lauren's message said, "You need to know she's blaming your mom now." I did not open the attachments immediately. I looked across the parking lot and saw Dad staring down at his own phone. Then he called me. "I just got something from Amber," he said. "What?" A message with screenshots between her and your mother. My stomach tightened. What does Amber say? Dad read the first line aloud. Mom planned this long before the wedding. I'm done taking the blame for her. I closed my eyes. For weeks, Patricia and Amber had protected the same story. Now they were beginning to protect themselves. Dad read Amber's message twice before he said anything else. She sent 6 screenshots. I could still see his car across the parking lot, his head bent over his phone. Do any of them involve me? I asked. Dad said yes. Then send me only those. He sounded confused. You don't want to see the rest? I told him no. Amber had spent years turning private conversations into ammunition. I was not going to reward that by collecting every ugly thing she and Mom had ever said to each other. If a message involved my name, Dad's name, or the wedding recording, I had a reason to see it. If it concerned Amber's marriage, Claire, or somebody else's private conflict, it belonged to them. The first screenshot reached me before I started the car. It was dated 3 weeks before the wedding. Amber had written, Rachel still hasn't agreed to the sisters' tribute. Mom replied, don't push the tribute. Let her think you dropped it. Amber answered, then how do I explain why she hasn't been around without making the wedding about her? Patricia wrote, you don't need to explain 6 years. People already know she's difficult. If she says something ugly, let her own it. Amber replied, she won't say anything if she knows she's being watched. Mom's next message was the line I had already heard in the recording, only now I could see it in context. Then don't argue. Let her talk until she gives you one sentence you can use. I read it slowly. Mom had absolutely suggested the method. That part was no longer arguable. But Amber's next message prevented her from becoming a helpless daughter following instructions. That might actually work. If people hear her in her own voice, nobody can say I'm making her look bad. Mom answered, just don't turn your wedding into a circus. Amber wrote, I won't. I just need them to understand why she's been gone. Dad sent the next screenshot. It was from the day after my video call with Amber. Amber had written, I got something. Mom responded, what? Amber replied. She said she hopes the wedding falls apart. There was a pause in the thread, then Patricia wrote, what did you say before that? Amber answered, nothing that matters. Mom replied, Amber. Then Amber wrote, she was already angry. I asked her to say what she really thought. Patricia's next message surprised me. Do not play private audio at the wedding. Amber responded, I'm not stupid. Mom wrote, good. Because that would make you look cruel, not her. I sat very still. Dad called again. That one changes things. It changes one thing. What? Mom suggested getting a usable sentence. Amber decided what to do with it. Dad was quiet. I continued. Mom is responsible for teaching the method and helping create the setup. Amber is responsible for turning it into a public humiliation after Mom explicitly told her not to play it. That's how I read it. Then don't let either of them rewrite it. Dad exhaled. Your mother is already saying Amber took everything too far. And Amber is saying Mom planned everything. Yes. They're both choosing the half that protects them. For once, Dad did not ask me what he should do. He said, I'm going to talk to them separately. Good. I'll call you later. Only if it directly involves me. Dad gave a small, tired laugh. You really mean that? I do. I drove home with my phone on silent. By the time I arrived, the family thread had become exactly what I had hoped to avoid. Claire sent me only enough to warn me that Amber and Mom were arguing in front of everyone. Amber had posted several screenshots showing Patricia advising her how to handle me. Patricia responded by saying the images were incomplete and that Amber had ignored repeated warnings not to use private material publicly. Then Patricia posted her own screenshots. Claire asked whether I wanted them. I said no. 10 minutes later, Amber called. I considered letting it ring, but I answered because I knew what would happen otherwise. She would tell somebody else, I refused to speak to her, and the old machinery would start turning again. What? I said. Mom is throwing me under the bus. Her voice was raw, not theatrical. She sounded furious and scared. I'm not in the family thread. I know Claire is sending you things, she asked. I told her not to send me private messages that don't involve me. That's convenient. What do you want, Amber? I want you to tell Dad that Mom started this. I already told Dad what the screenshots involving me show. Then tell him she planned the wedding thing. I can't tell him that because the messages show something more complicated. Amber went silent. Mom told you how to provoke me, I said. She told you to wait until I gave you a sentence you could use. That was manipulative. Exactly. She also told you not to play private audio at the wedding. She was covering herself. Maybe. But the message exists. You don't know what she meant. Correct. I don't. You always defend her when it matters. I almost laughed at the reversal. I have spent the last 3 weeks proving she lied to me. And now that there's proof she manipulated me. Suddenly you care about nuance. I care about accuracy. She taught me how to do this. The words came out louder. I let the silence sit. Amber continued. Do you think I was born knowing how to manage Dad? How to talk Mom down? How to keep everybody from fighting? She taught me what to say, when to say it, who could handle which version. That explains something. It explains everything. No. Her breathing sharpened. It explains how you learned it, I said. It doesn't erase when you chose to use it. You have no idea what it was like living there after you left. That's true. Mom was constantly managing Dad's moods. Dad complained about you but didn't want anyone saying anything too harsh. Every holiday turned into whether somebody should invite you. I was the one who stayed. You've said that before. Because it matters. It matters to you. It should matter to everybody. I leaned against my kitchen counter. Amber, did you want me back? She stopped. The question had not occurred to me until I asked it. What kind of question is that? A direct one. She sighed angrily. Of course I did. Why? Because you're my sister. That isn't what I asked. Oh my God. You said every holiday became about whether somebody should invite me. You said you were the one who stayed. Did you actually want me there? Or did you want everyone to know you were the daughter who stayed? That's disgusting. Maybe. Answer it. You think everything I've ever done was some competition with you? No. I think some of it was. Amber's voice dropped. You left me with them. That stopped me. I did not defend myself immediately. What do you mean? You got to walk away when things got bad. Dad told me to stay away. You could have fought. I tried twice. You could have fought harder. There was so much anger in her voice that for a moment she sounded younger than 28. Why? I asked. So, you wouldn't be alone there? Maybe. That was the first thing she had said in weeks that felt unplanned. I sat down at my kitchen table. Amber, if you needed me, why did you help keep me away? She did not answer. I waited. Finally, she said, because once you were gone, everything was easier. There it was. Not kinder. Easier. For who? For everybody. That sounds like Mom. Well, maybe Mom wasn't wrong about everything. No, she wasn't. Amber seemed surprised. Our family did have conflict, I said. Dad avoided it. I pushed too hard sometimes. You took things personally. Mom tried to control outcomes. None of that makes false information okay. You make it sound so clinical. That's because I'm trying not to scream at you. She went quiet. I continued. I understand why being the daughter who stayed mattered to you. I understand why having me disappear made the family quieter. But you don't get to use that to justify making sure I stayed the villain. I didn't make you the villain. You played a sentence at your wedding and told a room full of people I was jealous. You said it. We've done this already, because you refuse to admit that part matters. It matters. I said it. I was angry. I was wrong to say I hoped your wedding would fall apart. None of that gives you permission to hide why I said it. Amber started crying. Not loud sobs. Her breathing simply broke, and for a moment I heard nothing except her trying to pull herself back together. I did not rush to comfort her. That would have been our old pattern in reverse, and neither of us needed it. When she spoke again, her voice was quieter. Evan left. I closed my eyes. When? Last night. Where did he go? I don't know. A hotel. A friend. He said he needed space. I'm sorry. Are you? Yes. You wanted my wedding to fall apart. I wanted the version of it where you used me as a prop to fall apart. I didn't want your marriage to end. That sounds like lawyer language. I'm not a lawyer. You know what I mean. I did. Did Evan tell you why he left? He says he doesn't know what's real anymore. That sentence hurt in a way I did not expect, Amber continued. He went through old messages, not my phone, his own, things I sent him, screenshots from arguments with his mother, things from when we were planning the wedding. He says he keeps finding places where I gave him only part of conversations. I did not speak. He says he doesn't know whether I lied to him. Did you? I didn't invent anything. That wasn't the question. She made a sound between a laugh and a sob. You're unbelievable. Amber, I cropped things. How often? I don't know. Did you ever crop them to change what someone meant? Silence. I did not need the answer. She whispered, Mom taught me that context can distract people from the point. I looked toward the window. There was the inheritance Patricia had given her younger daughter. Not money. Not property. A method. What was the point? I asked. What? In the conversations with Evan? What point were you trying to make? That his mother didn't respect me. That he kept letting people talk to me however they wanted. That I was always being made to look unreasonable. Were you? Sometimes. And sometimes? Another silence. Sometimes I wanted him on my side. The honesty was painful, but it was honesty. Then tell him that. He won't talk to me. Give him time. You mean like Dad gave you time? No. Her voice sharpened. What's the difference? You're not being told through somebody else that Evan wants space. Evan told you himself. Amber went quiet. I continued. And if he says he needs space, respect it. Don't have Mom call him. Don't have me call him. Don't send Claire. If he wants to talk, he knows how. That worked great for you. It's still the right thing to do when the message actually comes from the person. She hung up shortly after that. I sat at the table for several minutes with the phone in front of me. I felt sorry for her. That did not erase what she had done. Both could be true. Evan contacted me 2 days later. His message was short. I'm staying elsewhere for now. I'm not asking you to get involved. I need to know one thing about the wedding recording. I called him because the question concerned me directly. What do you need? Did Amber ever tell you I approved the tribute? No. Did she ever imply I knew what she planned to play? No. He exhaled. Why? Because she told me you were okay with it. My stomach tightened. With what? The sisters segment, not the recording specifically. She said you two had worked out what would be included. That isn't true. I figured. Evan, I need to be careful here. I'm not going to tell you what your wife intended. I'm not asking. She asked me to participate. I refused after the video call turned into an argument. I believed the tribute had been dropped. Okay. That is everything I personally know. Thank you. I expected the call to end, but he hesitated. Then he said, I keep thinking about something you said at the reception. What? That you came because your dad asked directly. Yes. I didn't understand why you emphasized directly. I do now. Evan was quiet. I'm not trying to make this about your marriage, I said. I know. Then don't use me as evidence that Amber is a bad wife. I'm not. Figure out what happened between you and her using your relationship, not mine. I will. He kept his word. At least with me. He did not send me more marital screenshots. He did not ask me to interpret Amber. The next updates I received came from Dad because Amber and Mom kept pulling him into their fight. 3 days later, Dad called to tell me he had moved into the guest room. I did not ask why. He told me anyway. Your mother and I had our first direct argument about all of this. What does that mean? It means I told her I don't want her answering questions for me anymore. That's a start. She says you put that language in my head. I laughed, despite myself. Of course she does. I told her it was my decision. How did she take that? Badly. I resisted the urge to ask for details. Dad continued. She keeps saying Amber is trying to destroy her to save her marriage. Maybe Amber is trying to save herself. That's what I said. And? Your mother said I'm taking Amber's side. I closed my eyes. Dad, do you hear it? Yes. Every disagreement had to become a side. He said, I also told her I'm not going to defend Amber. I saw the messages. She chose what happened at the wedding. Good. Your mother said Amber learned everything from her. That's not the defense she thinks it is. Dad almost laughed, but he stopped himself. Then his voice became serious. There's something else. I waited. Amber sent me more messages this morning. I didn't ask for them. Do they involve me? Yes. Then send only those. He did. The first message was from Patricia to Amber, dated before my video call. Do not make Rachel the center of your wedding. Let people see for themselves who she is. Amber answered, That's the problem. She'll behave in public. Then everyone will think I exaggerated. Patricia wrote, Then leave it alone. Amber replied, No. I'm tired of her getting credit for being composed after making everyone miserable in private. Mom answered, Amber, stop. Then came Amber's message. If I make her angry enough, she'll say something we can use. I stared at the screen. The sentence felt heavier than the wedding cue sheet. The cue sheet proved planning. This proved intent. Amber had not merely accepted Mom's suggestion after the fact. She had wanted to provoke me. Dad sent one more screenshot from later that same conversation. Patricia. I said, Leave it alone. Amber. You're the one who always says Rachel tells on herself if you let her talk. Patricia. That doesn't mean turn your reception into a courtroom. Amber. People believe the bride. I stopped reading. There was no longer a version of this story where Amber could say Mom made her do it. Mom had built the system. Amber had learned it. Then Amber had improved it for an audience. I saved the screenshots and did nothing else. That evening, Amber called again. I did not answer. She called a second time, then a third. Finally, a text appeared. Mom sent you those, didn't she? I stared at the words before replying. Dad sent me messages that directly involved me. The typing indicator appeared. You have no idea what she's doing. Another message followed. She's trying to make me look like the monster so Dad won't leave her. Then another. Please call me. I put the phone face down. For most of my life, my mother and sister had both believed that whoever controlled the explanation controlled the outcome. Now each of them was trying to make me the judge of the other. I had no intention of taking the job. Amber called twice more that night. I did not answer. The next morning, she sent me a message that was almost a paragraph long, explaining that Mom had spent years teaching her how to manage. Dad. Soften conversations and keep people from turning against one another. Halfway through, the explanation became an accusation. If I had not abandoned the family, she wrote, she would never have been forced into the role Mom had given her. I read the message once and put my phone down. There were enough true pieces inside it to make the lie around them dangerous. Amber had been young when she learned those habits. She had lived with our parents after I left. She had probably been rewarded for making difficult situations easier. None of that explained a 28-year-old bride telling an AV team exactly where to begin an audio file so a room full of guests would hear only the sentence that made her sister look jealous. I did not respond until that afternoon. What Mom taught you is between you and Mom. What you chose to do with me is between you and me. I'm not going to combine those so you can hand one responsibility back to her. Amber immediately started typing. I watched the indicator for a few seconds, then turned the phone over before the answer arrived. For most of my life, someone in the Dawson family had believed every conflict needed to be resolved before anybody could sleep. That urgency had created some of our worst decisions. I was learning that a conversation could remain unfinished without becoming an emergency. Patricia tried a different strategy. She returned to the family group chat with another proposal for everyone to meet at my parents' house and put the ugliness behind us. This time, the response was nothing like the first invitation. Aunt Claire answered first. If you need to apologize to Rachel, call Rachel. If you need to talk to David, talk to David. I don't think all of us sitting there while you explain what everyone meant is helping. My cousin Lauren wrote that she agreed and wanted people to stop sending her screenshots about conversations she had not been part of. Uncle Mark, who had spent most of the last few weeks trying to avoid taking any position, wrote something even simpler. Please don't tell me why someone else isn't attending something anymore. I'll ask them. I read the messages twice, not because they praised me, they did not, but because of how ordinary they were. Nobody declared Mom evil. Nobody announced that I had been right about everything. They were simply refusing the old delivery system. For years, Patricia's power had depended less on people obeying her than on people finding it easier to ask her. Is Dad still mad? Does Rachel want to come? Is Amber upset? Should Claire know what happened? Mom always had an answer. Now Claire was saying she would ask me herself. Mark was saying he would ask whoever was absent. Lauren no longer wanted a summary. The machinery was not exploding. People were just unplugging from it. Not everyone thought that was an improvement. My cousin Eric, who had attended Amber's wedding and had never been especially close to me, wrote that the family had already heard enough about old recordings and people needed to let things go. He did not defend Mom's messages or Amber's wedding stunt. He simply said, at some point, digging up every bad thing somebody said becomes its own kind of damage. I could have answered with 6 years of examples. Instead, I wrote, you're allowed to think I should have let it go after the wedding. Just make sure that's your opinion, not one someone delivered for you. He replied, it is. Then I respect that, I wrote. The conversation ended there. That exchange mattered to me almost as much as Claire's support. I did not need direct communication to produce agreement. That would only have replaced one form of control with another. If Eric heard the same facts and still thought my response had gone too far, that was his judgment. I could live with people disapproving of me. What I no longer accepted was being asked to defend myself against an opinion nobody had actually formed themselves. Amber's social world began changing more quietly. I learned most of it because she told me during one of the few calls I answered. Not because I went looking. 2 bridesmaids had stopped responding in their group chat after the details of the audio cue became known. One of them finally told Amber she could forgive an ugly fight between sisters, but was uncomfortable with the fact that the humiliation had been scheduled into a wedding program. Another friend had apparently asked whether Amber had ever shown her cropped screenshots about someone else. Amber treated both reactions as betrayals. They're acting like I committed some crime, Amber told me after 2 bridesmaids began pulling away. You didn't commit a crime. They're deciding what they're comfortable being around. You could tell them Mom pushed me into it. I'm not explaining you to your friends, but she taught me this. I know. That explains where you learned it. It doesn't erase what you chose to do with it. Amber went quiet, then hung up. For once, nobody called 10 minutes later to tell me what she had really meant. That was becoming another change in our family. People could end a conversation without a third person calling 10 minutes later to explain what they really meant. Evan contacted me once during that period. He said he and Amber were still separated and that he had consulted an attorney about what ending the marriage would involve if they reached that decision. He wasn't asking me what he should do. He only wanted me to know that their separation was about what he had discovered inside his own marriage, not about anything I had persuaded him to believe. I told him that whatever happened next belonged to him and Amber. Then I asked the only question I considered mine to ask. Whether my sister was safe. He said she was. I left it there. I did not ask where he was staying, who his lawyer was, whether divorce papers would be filed, or what would happen to anything they owned together. If their marriage ended, it would be because trust inside it had failed. I had no intention of inserting myself into the wreckage just because Amber had once dragged me onto the stage with her. Dad's situation moved more slowly. After a week in the guest room, he called me and said he had rented a furnished apartment in Richmond for a short period. The place was close enough to his regular routines that he was not turning the separation into a logistical disaster, but far enough from the house that sleeping separately meant more than closing a bedroom door. He did not use the word divorce. I don't know what I'm doing long term, he told me. I just know I can't keep having the same conversation in the same house. What conversation? That she was keeping peace. I leaned back in my chair. Dad said he had asked Mom whether, if she could go back to 2020, she would send him the shortened recording again. Patricia had apparently said she would probably handle it differently now, but she still believed the full conversation would only have made him more upset. Dad asked whether she regretted telling relatives I wanted no contact. Mom said she regretted that people had misunderstood what she was trying to do. That was when I knew I needed to leave for a while, he said. Because she didn't apologize? Because she still thinks the problem was the result, not the method. I was quiet. Dad continued. I told her I'm not moving back while every lie is still called an attempt to protect me. That sounds reasonable. She said it sounds like you. I almost smiled. I'm sure it does. I told her it was my sentence. That mattered more than he realized. Dad was learning to own his words again. Patricia called me that evening. Your father has moved out. I know. Of course you do. He told me. That's what I mean. I waited. Her voice sharpened. You wanted everyone talking directly. Congratulations. Now I have relatives calling me individually to ask whether specific things I said were true. David has an apartment. Amber barely speaks to me unless she wants another screenshot. Is this what you call healthier? I call it people asking the person involved. Our family is falling apart. Maybe. The answer stopped her. You can say that so calmly? I'm not calm about everything, Mom. I just don't think forcing everybody back into the same room makes the relationships real. We used to have dinners, holidays, reunions. We also had people attending because they were told somebody else expected them there, and people staying home because they were told somebody else didn't want them. That isn't all we had. I know. Mom went quiet. That was another truth I would not erase for convenience. We had good holidays. Dad had grilled too much food every 4th of July. Claire brought desserts nobody else could reproduce. Amber once spent an entire Christmas Eve making terrible ornaments with our younger cousins because the craft kit instructions made no sense. Mom had created traditions people genuinely loved. Her mistake was not that every happy memory had been fake. It was that she had come to believe those memories gave her the right to manipulate whatever threatened the picture. The reunion is still happening, she said. I knew exactly which reunion she meant. Every July, Patricia hosted the extended Dawson family in the backyard. It was the event I had pictured at the beginning of this story. Though at that moment in spring I did not yet know what those chairs would look like. I assumed it was. I'm not canceling a tradition because people are angry. That's your decision. Are you coming? I haven't thought about it. You need to. No, I don't. Rachel, I'll decide when I decide. She hung up angry. Over the next several weeks, something happened that probably frightened Mom more than shouting ever could have. People made plans without her. Claire drove to Charlottesville and had coffee with me. She did not tell Patricia first. Mark invited Dad to lunch at a restaurant rather than asking Mom whether Dad was free. Lauren started a small cousin group chat that did not exist to discuss the family crisis at all. It was mostly pictures, jokes, and plans for a weekend breakfast when 2 cousins were passing through Richmond. Nobody announced that Patricia was banned. They simply stopped making every connection pass through her. Dad told me later that Mom noticed almost immediately. She asked Claire why she had not mentioned seeing me. Claire answered, because Rachel and I made plans with each other. Mom said that sounded secretive. Claire told her it was coffee, not a coup. I laughed when Claire told me. That was rude, she admitted. It was a little. I'm not apologizing yet. Fair. By early June, invitations for the July reunion went out. For the first time I could remember, mine came directly from Mom, rather than through a group message or another relative. It was a digital invitation with the usual details, followed 10 minutes later by a personal text. I'm inviting you myself so there can be no confusion. I stared at the sentence. It was almost progress. Then another message appeared. If you choose not to come, everyone will know who really broke this family. There she was. I did not answer. A few days later, Claire mentioned that reunion attendance looked unusually low. She had heard several relatives say they already had other plans. Mark told her he might stop by briefly but no longer wanted to spend an entire day pretending everything was normal. Lauren planned to visit a friend that weekend. Eric, who thought I should have let the wedding incident go, was apparently attending. That pleased me in a strange way. The reunion was not dividing neatly into Team Rachel and Team Patricia. People were simply making different choices. Mom did not see it that way. She called me after the first round of RSVPs. Did you tell people not to come? No. Claire declined. Ask Claire. Lauren declined. Ask Lauren. You've been talking to both of them. Yes. And now neither of them is coming. That doesn't mean I told them not to. You expect me to believe that? I don't need you to. Her breathing tightened. This is exactly what you wanted. What? To prove the family only existed because of me. I never said that. You don't have to. I almost pointed out the irony of that sentence, but there was no reason. Mom, I haven't told a single person whether they should attend your reunion. Then tell them they should. No. Why? Because that would be the same thing. They respect you now. Then I should be even more careful not to use that. She went quiet. I could hear how much she hated the answer, because it denied her the symmetry she wanted. If I used my new credibility to coordinate a boycott, then I would become exactly what she could understand. A rival family organizer. Another person competing to control who attended, who spoke, and what the group believed. I refused the role. You're just going to watch everyone walk away, she said. They're adults. That is such an easy thing to say, when you don't have to hold anyone together. I thought about that. Maybe she was right about one thing. Letting people make their own decisions was frightening. Some relationships would not survive. Some relatives would choose distance. Some would choose Patricia. Some would choose Amber. Some would decide the entire conflict was exhausting and spend their summer somewhere else. Control could create the appearance of stability. Freedom did not guarantee it, but that did not make control love. I'd rather know what people actually choose, I said. Mom ended the call. Amber found out about the low RSVPs and reacted exactly as I expected. She called Mom, blamed her for turning everyone against them, then called Dad and said the reunion would become another public humiliation. I only knew because Dad later mentioned that both of them had contacted him separately and tried to persuade him not to attend. What are you going to do? I asked. I'm going. Because Mom wants you there? No. Because Amber doesn't? No. Then why? Because I've gone every year for more than 30 years. I want to see people. I smiled. That sounds like your decision. It is. A week later, he told me Evan and Amber were still living apart. Evan had moved beyond simply asking for space and was talking seriously with counsel about ending the marriage if reconciliation proved impossible. Dad was careful to say he did not know what papers had or had not been filed, and I did not ask. Amber still blamed the wedding fallout for destroying everything. She was not entirely wrong. The wedding had been the first crack everyone saw. What she still refused to accept was that the crack mattered because of what it revealed underneath. Dad also told me he was extending the short-term rental. He had not decided whether his marriage to Mom would end. He had decided he would not move home simply because Patricia wanted the separation to stop being embarrassing. She asked if I was really throwing away 40 years because of some texts, he said. What did you tell her? That the texts weren't the 40 years. They were the reason I finally looked at parts of the 40 years differently. I let that settle. Then he changed the subject. The reunion is Saturday after next. I know. Your mother invited you? Yes. Directly? Very directly. Dad laughed softly. Are you going? I haven't decided. He did not tell me I should. That was the part I noticed. I'm going, he said. I'd like to see you there. But I'm not asking you to prove anything by showing up. I looked at the invitation still sitting unanswered on my phone. For years, every family event had come wrapped in somebody else's expectation. Dad wants you there. Dad doesn't want you there. Amber needs you to support her. Mom needs everyone together. If you don't come, people will think. If you do come, don't make trouble. This was different. Dad wanted to see me. He had told me himself. And he had left the choice with me. What time are you getting there? I asked. Probably around noon. Okay. He hesitated. Does that mean you're coming? I looked out my window and thought about Mom's message telling me everyone would know who broke the family if I stayed away. I thought about the relatives who had stopped asking Patricia what other people meant. I thought about the wedding ballroom, the 27 missing seconds, and the 6 years when all of us had mistaken silence for agreement because silence was easier than checking. "Yes," I said. "I'm coming." Not to prove the family was healed. Not to forgive anyone on command. I wanted to see what the Dawson family looked like when everyone finally arrived or stayed away for reasons that belonged to them. The morning of the reunion, I almost changed my mind twice. The first time was while I was making coffee in Charlottesville. The second was when I reached the ramp for Interstate 64 and realized I could still take the next exit, turn around, and spend the day somewhere no one expected anything from me. I kept driving. That mattered more to me than whether I stayed 4 hours or 40 minutes. For years, family events had been places other people defined before I arrived. I was invited because someone supposedly wanted me there, excluded because someone supposedly needed space, or expected to attend because my absence would send a message. That Saturday, I drove to Richmond because I had decided to go. If I left early, that would be my decision too. I reached my parents' neighborhood a little after noon. Mom had always started the reunion at 11:30, even though most people arrived closer to 1. Her logic was that early food prevented late arrivals from taking over the schedule. She had probably explained that to me 20 times growing up. When I turned onto their street, I saw the 2 white canopy tents in the backyard above the fence and several cars parked along the curb, fewer than usual. Dad's car was there. I parked 3 houses down rather than blocking the driveway. I sat for a moment with both hands on the steering wheel and reminded myself of the only rule I needed. I was not going there to force a reckoning. We had already had enough reckonings. I was going to see what remained when nobody was being ordered into position. Claire spotted me first. She was carrying a bowl from the kitchen toward the backyard and stopped so abruptly that the screen door nearly swung back into her shoulder. Then she smiled. "You came." I said I might. "You told your dad?" Dad asked me. Claire gave me a look that said she understood the distinction now. She set the bowl down on a table and hugged me. I hugged her back. No one announced it. No one called Mom over to witness the reunion of the estranged relatives. We simply stood there for a second. Then Claire asked whether I wanted iced tea. That was how the day began. The backyard looked almost exactly the way I remembered it from childhood. Dad had mowed too carefully. Folding tables were covered in white plastic cloths weighed down at the corners because a light breeze had picked up. Mom had arranged framed family photographs along one side table. Most were old enough that no recent conflict could contaminate them. Amber and me at the county fair. Dad holding both of us beside a lake. Mom laughing with Claire at a Christmas dinner when I was still in college. They were real photographs from real happy days. The chairs were what changed the scene. 30 had been set out. Maybe 13 were occupied. A few more people arrived later, but not many. The empty chairs did not look dramatic in person. They just looked unnecessary. Some were folded against tables. Others sat in little groups under the tents, waiting for conversations that never formed. I remembered the image only because months earlier, at Amber's reception, Mom had told me my leaving would show everyone who I really was. Now people were staying away, and no single person could define what their absence meant. Uncle Mark arrived with his wife and stayed less than 2 hours. Eric came, exactly as I had heard he would, and greeted me politely. He did not apologize for believing I should have let the wedding incident go. I did not ask him to. We talked about his son's new job for 10 minutes, and the conversation was perfectly normal. Lauren did not attend, but she sent me a message around lunchtime saying, "Hope today is tolerable. I'm at the lake with friends, and have zero guilt about it." I replied that I approved of the zero guilt. Dad came out of the house carrying a tray of burgers and saw me near the drinks table. His face changed. Not dramatically. He just smiled in a way I had not seen directed at me in years. "You made it." I did. He put the tray down and wiped his hands on a towel. "Drive okay?" "Easy." "Traffic?" "Not bad." We were talking like two people relearning ordinary conversation, and I found that more emotional than if he had hugged me and apologized in front of everyone. He nodded toward the grill. "I made too much food." You always make too much food. Your mother says I do it because I don't know how to calculate portions. You were an engineer. Different discipline. I laughed. Dad smiled wider. That was all. Mom came outside about 10 minutes later. I had wondered how she would greet me. Part of me expected a public embrace because image had always mattered to her. Another part expected coldness because I had not supported her version of reconciliation. Instead, she stopped 3 feet away. I wasn't sure you'd come. I decided to. She looked past me toward Dad, then back at me. I'm glad. Thank you. Her expression tightened slightly, as if she expected something more. I did not give it. She moved on to ask Claire whether the potato salad needed more ice. For the first hour, the reunion functioned without anyone discussing the crisis. Kids ran through the yard. Mark complained about gas prices. Claire asked Dad whether his short-term apartment had decent air conditioning. He said yes, without explaining why he was still living there. Nobody pretended he had moved home. Amber had not arrived. I had not asked whether she was coming. That was another small discipline I had developed. If I wanted to know whether Amber planned to attend, I could ask Amber. I did not. Whether she came or not did not determine why I was there. She finally arrived around 1:30. She came alone. For a few seconds, the backyard went noticeably quieter. Nobody stopped talking entirely, but several conversations lost their rhythm. Amber wore a simple blue dress and sunglasses that she removed as soon as she passed through the gate. She looked thinner than she had at the wedding. Not dangerously thin, not transformed by tragedy. Just tired. Mom moved toward her immediately. Amber stepped sideways. I'm fine. Mom stopped. That 2-word boundary would have been invisible to anyone who did not know them. I knew them. Amber said hello to Dad. He hugged her. Then she turned toward me. Neither of us spoke for several seconds. Finally, she said, Hi. Hey. Her eyes moved toward the empty chairs. This is cheerful. I almost smiled. You're still good at entrances. Apparently not weddings. There were several possible answers to that. I chose none of them. She looked toward the food table. Is there anything left? Dad made enough for a minor evacuation. That made her laugh despite herself. For a moment, she looked like the sister I remembered from before. Every conversation became evidence. We ate at separate tables. Later, while most people were inside getting dessert, Amber found me near the far edge of the yard where Dad had a small garden. She held a paper cup in both hands. Evan filed, she said. I looked at her. For divorce? She nodded. How recently? Last week. I'm sorry. You keep saying that. Because I am. Amber stared at the grass. He says it's not because of you. I know. Her head lifted. He talked to you? Once. Weeks ago. He told me the separation was about your marriage and asked one factual question involving the wedding. That's all. He told me he talked to you. I waited. He said you refused to tell him whether he should leave me. That wasn't my decision. No. She looked toward the house. He says he doesn't know whether he can ever trust what I show him again. I did not tell her he should or should not. I did not tell her she deserved the divorce. I did not tell her she could fix it. Amber said, Mom keeps saying he'll calm down. What do you think? She gave me a bitter smile. I think Mom has been wrong about what other people mean a lot lately. That was the closest thing to self-awareness I had heard from her in months. What do you want? I asked. From Evan? From any of this. She looked genuinely uncertain. I wanted him to believe me. About what? About people. I waited. My friends. His mom, you, Mom. Whenever somebody did something that made me feel small or stupid or ignored, I wanted him to see it the way I did. That's normal. I didn't trust that he would. That's different. She nodded slowly. So I showed him the part that made the point. There it was again. But this time, she did not defend it. I thought that if the important part was true, the rest was just noise. I looked at her. That's what Mom used to say, Amber continued. Not exactly those words. But that was the idea. Context distracts from the point. Her face changed. She told you that? You told me she taught you that. Amber looked down. I still made the choices, she said. I did not answer immediately. She looked at me. That's what you want me to say, right? No. Come on, Rachel. I don't need the correct sentence from you. That's convenient. No. It's the whole reason this happened. Everybody has been trying to produce the sentence that proves which person they are. I don't need you to say the line that makes me feel vindicated. Amber stared at me. What I need from you, I said, is simpler. If you ever talk about me again, use what I actually said. If you don't know what I meant, ask me. That's it? No. Her mouth tightened. If you're angry with me, be angry with me. Don't turn it into what Dad thinks or what Mom says or what Evan believes, and don't use an audience. She nodded. Can you do that? I don't know. That answer was more useful than yes. She rubbed her thumb against the rim of the paper cup. Do you forgive me? I looked toward the house. Mom was visible through the kitchen window, carrying plates. Dad was talking to Claire under the tent. There were years when I would have felt required to give Amber a clean answer so the family could move forward. Yes would make me generous. No would make me the difficult sister again. I'm not there yet, I said. Her face tightened, but she did not argue. That doesn't mean never. I know. I'm also not going to pretend your marriage ending makes us even. I didn't ask. You might someday. She gave me a tired half smile. Probably. We stood in silence for another moment. Then Amber said, I hated you for leaving. I know. I also liked what happened after you left. I know that too. Her eyes filled slightly. I became easy to love. I understood what she meant. You became easy to compare. She nodded. That was probably the closest we came to forgiveness that day. She went inside for dessert. I stayed by the garden. Mom found me about 15 minutes later. She carried 2 slices of lemon cake and offered me one. I took it because refusing cake would have been absurd. Amber talked to you. Yes. What did she say? I looked at Mom. She stopped. Then she gave a short, humorless laugh. Right. Ask her. Yes. Mom sat in the chair beside mine. For a while we ate without talking. Then she said, David is extending the apartment through September. He told me. Of course. He's my father. I know. There was bitterness in her voice, but less than before. Mom looked toward the tents. Do you see what's happened? I knew what she meant. The empty chairs. Dad living elsewhere. Amber arriving alone. Relatives making separate plans. Yes. You said you wanted people to make their own choices. I did. Happy with the result? No. That seemed to surprise her. I don't like seeing you hurt, I said. I don't like Dad living in an apartment. I don't like Amber getting divorced. I don't like that Claire spent years thinking she was respecting a boundary I never set. Mom stared at me. Then why do you act like this is better? Because I would rather have a painful reality than a peaceful arrangement built on false information. She looked down at her cake. You think I never loved any of you. I have never said that. That's what everyone acts like. Then ask them. She laughed quietly. You really are going to use that answer forever, aren't you? Probably. Mom looked toward the empty chairs. I thought if I kept everyone from saying the worst things directly, we would stay together. You also decided what the worst things were. Yes. It was the first time she had said it that plainly. I didn't know how to stop once I started, she continued. I listened. Your father hated conflict. Amber needed constant reassurance. She stopped. I what? You always seemed fine without us. The sentence hurt more than I expected. I wasn't. I know that now. You could have asked. I know. Mom's eyes filled. I was afraid if people spoke directly, they would choose not to need me. There it was. Not an excuse. The truth underneath the excuse. I did not rescue her from it. Mom wiped beneath one eye quickly. I liked being the person everyone called, she said. I told myself it was because I was good at helping. Maybe sometimes it was. I'm sure sometimes it was. And sometimes I wanted to be necessary. I nodded. She looked at me. Is that what you wanted to hear? No. Her mouth tightened. I wanted you to understand it yourself. For a long time, neither of us spoke. Then Mom asked, Are you cutting me off? I don't know what our relationship looks like yet. You gave your father rules, boundaries, rules, Call them whatever you want. What are mine? Simple. Don't speak for me. Don't carry messages between Dad and me. Don't explain my choices to other people. If you want to know something about me, ask me. And if I make a mistake, then I decide what I do with it. Mom looked away. The old version of me would have softened the answer until she felt comfortable. I didn't. Mom looked away. The old version of our relationship would have required me to soften the sentence until she felt safe. I didn't. She eventually stood. I'm going to check the food. Okay. Before she walked away, she said, I am sorry about telling Claire you wanted no contact. I looked up. And the anniversary dinner? She added. And telling your father what you supposedly meant instead of making him ask you. It was not a complete apology. It did not cover everything. I did not force it to. Thank you, I said. She nodded and went back toward the house. By late afternoon, people began leaving. No dramatic speech ended the reunion. Nobody assembled for a family photograph. Dad packed leftover burgers into containers. Claire hugged me and told me to call her directly if I wanted coffee. Mark left with a polite goodbye to everyone. Eric helped Dad fold one of the tables before driving home. Amber left before Mom. She came over to me near my car. I'm going back to my apartment. Okay. She hesitated. If I text you, will you answer? If I want to. She rolled her eyes. Then she smiled. Fair. She walked away. Dad was the last person I spoke to. He came down the driveway carrying a container of food. You need this. I absolutely do not. I made too much. That sounds like your problem. Take the burgers, Rachel. I took the burgers. Dad leaned against my car. You okay? Yes. You sure? Yes. He nodded. The question felt so simple. Nobody had sent him to ask it. I'm going back to the apartment tonight, he said. Okay. Your mother knows. Good. We're talking. I figured. I don't know where it ends. You don't have to. Dad looked toward the house. I spent a long time letting other people tell me what a relationship was supposed to mean. I smiled slightly. Welcome to the club. He laughed. Then he hugged me. This time, I hugged him back. I drove home before sunset. That was in July. I am telling this story now in August, 5 months after Amber's wedding. Evan and Amber are living separately now, and the divorce process has begun. Whatever comes next will take its normal course, and I don't know every legal or financial detail because it isn't my marriage. They are living separately. I do not know how every legal and financial detail will end because it is not my marriage and I have stopped collecting information that does not belong to me. Dad is still in the apartment. He and Mom are talking, sometimes with professional help, sometimes badly, sometimes well. Whether they reconcile is their decision. I am no longer a reason either of them can use for staying or leaving. Amber and I exchange occasional messages. They are careful, sometimes painfully careful. She has apologized for the wedding recording without attaching Mom's name to the sentence. I have apologized for things I actually said over the years without apologizing for existing inconveniently in her version of the family. Mom calls me directly now. Not often. The first few times, she still tried to tell me what Dad thought about something. I stopped her. She corrected herself. That is what change looks like in real families more often than grand speeches do. Someone starts the old sentence, notices it, and chooses another one. The strangest thing is that I no longer care whether every relative believes my version of the past. Some still think I stayed away too long. They are right. Some think I was justified. They may be right too. Some believe Mom was trying to help and became controlling without admitting it to herself. I think there is truth there. Some think Amber's wedding stunt was unforgivable. I am not ready to decide whether anything is unforgivable forever. What changed was simpler. Nobody gets to tell me what everyone else thinks anymore. A few nights ago, I was sitting at home reading when my phone rang. Dad's name appeared on the screen. For a fraction of a second, the old instinct returned. I wondered whether Mom had asked him to call, whether Amber needed something, whether there was a family event I was expected to attend. Then I remembered. No intermediaries. Dad was calling because Dad wanted to call. I let the phone ring once more. Then I pressed answer. You don't have to control what everyone believes, but you should insist on direct communication before accepting someone else's version of the truth. Verify facts, own your mistakes, and set boundaries when trust is abused. If this story meant something to you, subscribe to the channel for more.